In 1975, a CIA director held up a pistol in front of senators and told them it could kill anyone without leaving a trace. This is in the congressional record. The weapon fired a frozen dart of shellfish toxin that dissolved into the bloodstream. The victim would feel a tiny sting like a mosquito bite, then cardiac arrest. The autopsy would show a heart attack. Natural causes. Tonight we're going through the CIA's assassination program. The weapons they built, the people they targeted. And the one hearing where they accidentally told the truth. September 17, 1975. The Hart Senate Office Building, Room 318. The church committee hearings were supposed to be routine oversight. Senators asking polite questions about intelligence activities. Maybe some classified details get discussed behind closed doors. Standard Washington theater. But William Colby walked into that hearing room carrying a briefcase that contained something no American was supposed to see. You have to understand where we were in 1975. Watergate had just brought down a president. The Pentagon Papers had shown us decades of lies about Vietnam. Americans were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about what their government actually did in the shadows. And the CIA was about to give them an answer they weren't prepared for. The Church Committee, officially the Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities, had been digging into CIA operations for months. Senator Frank Church of Idaho was running the show. He'd already uncovered assassination plots against foreign leaders, mind control experiments, domestic surveillance programs that made Nixon's dirty tricks look amateur. But this particular hearing was different. This was the day Colby decided to show them the hardware. Picture this, you're a senator. You've spent your career voting on budgets and debating farm bills. You think you understand how government works. Then the director of the Central Intelligence Agency opens a briefcase and pulls out what looks like a modified .45 caliber pistol. Except it's not firing bullets. Colby held it up like he was presenting evidence at a murder trial. Which in a way he was. This weapon fires a small dart, he told the committee. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, like he was describing office equipment. The dart is about the size of a human hair. It's made of a frozen mixture containing shellfish toxin. The senators just stared. You can see it in the transcript. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody asked him to repeat himself. They were too stunned to speak. The dart penetrates the skin, Colby continued, but leaves only a tiny red mark. The shellfish toxin causes cardiac arrest. The frozen mixture dissolves completely into the bloodstream. An autopsy would be unable to detect that the death was anything other than a heart attack. Hold that description in your mind. We're going to come back to it. But first, you need to understand how we got to the point where the CIA director was casually describing murder weapons to Congress. The story starts in 1952. The Korean War is raging. American POWs are coming back from Chinese camps talking about brainwashing, communist mind control, forced confessions that sounded too detailed, too convincing to be torture alone. The agency was convinced the Soviets and Chinese had developed some kind of chemical interrogation technique, so they decided to develop their own. The program had a lot of names over the years. Artichoke, Bluebird, the one you've probably heard of, MK Ultra, but the heart attack gun, that came from a different project entirely, something called MKNAOMI. MKNAOMI was the CIA's biological weapons program. While MK Ultra was trying to break minds, MKNAOMI was trying to break bodies. quietly, efficiently, without fingerprints. They partnered with the Army's Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick, Maryland. You know Fort Detrick today as the center of America's biodefense research. Back then, it was where they weaponized diseases. The collaboration was simple. The Army would develop the toxins and the CIA would figure out how to deliver them. Poison pens, contaminated cigars, lethal handkerchiefs, and eventually a gun that fired frozen death. The beauty of shellfish toxin from an assassin's perspective is that it occurs naturally. Saxitoxin, you can find it in contaminated clams and mussels. People die from it every year. Bad seafood, unfortunate accident, case closed. But if you concentrate it, purify it, freeze it into a tiny projectile, well, now you have something else entirely. The delivery system was the tricky part. You need something that looks innocent, something an operative could carry without suspicion. Something accurate enough to hit a target from a reasonable distance. Something quiet. They started with umbrellas. The famous Bulgarian umbrella assassination in London, that was Soviet technology, but the concept was sound. Except umbrellas are conspicuous in some climates. Hard to explain if you're caught with one on a sunny day in Havana or Cairo. So they went with a pistol, modified of course. The barrel was fitted with a telescopic sight. The firing mechanism was nearly silent, no gunpowder, just compressed air. The range was about 100 meters, close enough to be accurate, far enough to escape. The program was so classified that even within the CIA, only a handful of people knew it existed. The operational files were kept in a separate vault. The weapons were stored at a facility that officially didn't exist. The toxins were manufactured under cover of legitimate pharmaceutical research. And it worked. Not just the weapon, the entire cover-up. For more than 20 years, nobody outside the program knew the CIA had developed the perfect murder weapon. Until William Colby decided to tell Congress. Now you might wonder why he did it. Why would the director of the CIA voluntarily reveal one of the agency's darkest secrets? The answer is complicated. By 1975, Colby was trying to save the CIA from itself. The Church Committee was going to find out eventually. Better to control the revelation than let senators stumble onto it themselves. But here's the part that should bother you. When Colby held up that weapon, he wasn't confessing to a theoretical program. He wasn't describing something they'd developed but never used. The heart attack gun was real, it was operational, and according to documents that wouldn't be declassified for decades, they'd already used it. The committee members didn't ask that question. Maybe they were too shocked. Maybe they didn't want to know the answer. Maybe they figured some things are better left buried. But the documents exist, the operational reports, the target lists, the after-action summaries written in the clinical language of professional killers. Senator Church asked Colby one question that's worth remembering. Does the CIA currently possess this weapon? Colby's answer was careful. No, we do not, present tense. Currently, but that's not the same as saying they never possessed it. That's not the same as saying they never used it. The hearing lasted 6 hours. The heart attack gun was discussed for maybe 20 minutes. Then they moved on to other topics. Other weapons, other programs, other secrets that were supposed to stay buried. But that 20 minutes changed everything. For the first time, Americans had seen physical proof that their intelligence agency had developed assassination weapons. Not just planned them, not just theorized about them, built them, tested them, made them operational. The committee would eventually publish a final report, 5 volumes, thousands of pages. The heart attack gun got 3 paragraphs. 3 paragraphs to describe a weapon that could kill anyone, anywhere, without leaving evidence. 3 paragraphs to summarize a program that turned murder into a technical problem to be solved by scientists in lab coats. But those 3 paragraphs opened a door that the CIA has never been able to close. Because once you know they built the perfect assassination weapon, you start wondering about all those convenient heart attacks, all those sudden cardiac events, all those deaths that seemed natural at the time. The names are in the files, the dates, the locations, some of the operational reports. But 48 years later, most of those files are still classified, still buried, still waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Tomorrow night we're going through the church committee hearings themselves. What the senators saw, what they chose to investigate, and what they chose to ignore. Because the heart attack gun wasn't the only weapon William Colby brought to that hearing room. Some secrets, once revealed, demand to be followed to the end. September 16, 1975. Room 318 of the Hart Senate Office Building. You can still walk past that room today. Most people do, never knowing what happened there. What senators saw that morning changed how America understood its own government. Forever. The church committee had been digging for months. Senator Frank Church, Idaho Democrat, thin as a rail with silver hair and the kind of moral certainty that made spooks nervous. His committee had one job: figure out what the hell the CIA had been doing for the past 25 years. The Watergate hearings were fresh. Trust in government was bleeding out like a stuck pig. Americans wanted answers. They'd been hearing testimony for weeks. Assassination plots against Castro, mind control experiments, surveillance of American citizens, each revelation worse than the last, but September 16th was different. That morning they wheeled in a cart. The cart held what looked like a modified Colt .45, except it wasn't. The barrel had been replaced with a battery-powered firing mechanism. Instead of bullets, it fired a tiny frozen dart, smaller than a mosquito bite. The dart would melt inside the target's body, leaving only a microscopic puncture wound that would look like a heart attack to any coroner who wasn't specifically looking for murder. The committee members passed it around like they were handling a rattlesnake. Senator Walter Mondale from Minnesota held it longest. You could see him working through the implications. This wasn't some theoretical weapon. This was real, manufactured, tested, ready to use. William Colby sat at the witness table. CIA director, former OSS operative who'd spent World War II behind Nazi lines. He had the kind of face that gave away nothing, even when he was confessing to murder. The senators asked him the obvious question: had they ever used it? Colby's answer was careful, lawyered, "Not to my knowledge." But here's what he didn't say: he'd only been CIA director for 2 years. This weapon had been in development since the late 1960s. Draw your own conclusions about what happened in those missing years. The technical briefing came next. The weapon fired a dart made of frozen shellfish toxin. Saxitoxin, if you want to get scientific about it, one of the deadliest substances on Earth. A pinprick amount would stop your heart in minutes. The symptoms, exactly what you'd expect from cardiac arrest: chest pain, difficulty breathing, collapse, death. The genius was in the delivery system. No gunshot wound, no powder burns, no obvious signs of violence. Just a tiny puncture that would disappear as the frozen dart melted. The victim would appear to have died of natural causes. perfect for removing inconvenient people without starting international incidents. Senator Church asked the question everyone was thinking. How do we know you destroyed all of these? The room went quiet. Colby shifted in his chair. The pause lasted long enough to count heartbeats. We have no evidence that any such weapons remain in our inventory. You notice what he didn't say? He didn't say they'd been destroyed. He said there was no evidence they remained in inventory. That's not the same thing, not even close. The hearing transcript runs 847 pages. Most of it's still classified, but here's what made it into the public record. The CIA had developed multiple assassination weapons. They'd tested them. They'd refined them. They'd produced them in quantity. And when asked directly whether they'd ever killed anyone with them, the best answer they could give was, "Not to my knowledge." The Shellfish Toxin was the star of the show, but it wasn't the only thing in their arsenal. They'd also developed weapons that fired tiny darts filled with botulinum toxin, ricin, even exotic poisons harvested from South American frogs, each one designed to mimic natural death, each one small enough to be dismissed by a coroner as coincidence. But here's the part that should bother you. The CIA wasn't supposed to kill people on American soil. That was the rule. The law. The sacred boundary between foreign intelligence and domestic law enforcement. Yet they developed these weapons at Fort Detrick, Maryland, 30 miles from Washington, D.C., in the heart of America. Senator Church asked Colby about domestic use. The CIA director's answer was a masterpiece of bureaucratic evasion. Such operations would require presidential authorization and would be conducted in coordination with appropriate agencies. Translation: we'd only murder Americans if the president told us to, and we'd make sure the FBI knew about it. That answer raises more questions than it answers. What constituted appropriate agencies? How many such authorizations had been requested? How many approved? The hearing transcript goes dark on those details. 47 years later, it's still classified. The senators kept pressing. They wanted to know about specific targets, specific operations, specific bodies. Colby stonewalled with the skill of a man who'd spent decades keeping secrets. But the weapon itself told a story he couldn't deny. You don't spend millions of dollars developing the perfect murder weapon unless you plan to use it. The hearing ended with promises, oversight, reform, new rules to prevent future abuses. The CIA would be leashed, controlled, made accountable to Congress and the American people. The heart attack gun would be destroyed. The program shut down, the nightmare over. Except nightmares don't end just because you wake up. They hide, they wait, they find new forms in the darkness. And what the church committee couldn't know, was that the heart attack gun was just one small piece of a much larger machine. A machine that had been running in the shadows for decades, building weapons that would make a frozen dart seem quaint. The real story wasn't happening in room 318 of the Hart Senate office building. It was happening 30 miles away, in a concrete bunker that didn't officially exist, where scientists in white coats were perfecting the art of invisible murder. What Fort Detrick was really building in Building 470 would make the church committee hearings look like a children's tea party. Fort Detrick sits in the rolling hills of Maryland, 45 miles northwest of Washington. From the outside, it looked like any other army installation. Neat rows of barracks, administrative buildings, a flagpole, But if you knew where to look, and most people didn't, you'd notice something odd about Building 470. No windows on the first floor, double doors that required 2 different keys, and a ventilation system that seemed far too elaborate for a simple research facility. The Army called it the Special Operations Division. The scientists who worked there had a different name for it, the place where they figured out how to kill people without anyone knowing they'd been murdered. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb arrived at Fort Detrick in 1951 with a chemistry PhD from Caltech and a mandate from CIA Director Alan Dulles that was both simple and terrifying. Develop biological and chemical weapons that could eliminate targets without detection. The kind of weapons that would make murder look like natural death. Gottlieb was a slight man with a stutter who grew orchids as a hobby. His neighbors in suburban Virginia thought he worked for the agriculture department. They had no idea he was overseeing a program that would eventually test biological agents on American citizens, develop assassination tools for foreign operations, and create weapons so sophisticated they wouldn't be discovered for another 20 years. The Special Operations Division operated under something called Technical Services Division, TSD. Even within the CIA, most people didn't know what TSD actually did. Those who did know called it the magicians. Building 470 housed laboratories that worked with some of the most dangerous substances on Earth: anthrax, botulinum toxin, shellfish toxin, a poison so potent that a single drop could kill a grown man in minutes while mimicking a heart attack so perfectly that even an autopsy might miss it. But here's what should bother you. They weren't just studying these substances. They were weaponizing them. The scientists at Fort Detrick worked closely with a company called H.P. White Laboratory in Maryland. White specialized in ballistics testing, the science of projectiles. Together, they were solving a very specific problem. How do you deliver a lethal dose of an untraceable poison to a target who doesn't know they're being attacked? The answer was elegant in its simplicity. You freeze the toxin into a tiny dart, so small it feels like a mosquito bite. You design a delivery system that fires the dart with compressed air, silent, accurate, deadly. The dart melts in the target's bloodstream, leaving only a microscopic entry wound that disappears within hours. Nobody asks questions when a 50-year-old man has a heart attack, especially if he's under stress, especially if there's no obvious cause of death except cardiac arrest. You know, if you're still listening at this point, you're one of us. Hit subscribe. We uncover a new American mystery every single night. The program had a code name, MKNAOMI. Even today, most of the files remain classified. What we know comes from congressional hearings in the 1970s, when senators finally started asking why the CIA was developing assassination weapons that could kill anyone anywhere without leaving evidence. But back in the 1950s, nobody was asking those questions. The Cold War was escalating. The Soviets had nuclear weapons. American intelligence agencies operated with budgets that nobody audited and mandates that nobody questioned. If Gottlieb needed a new laboratory, he got it. If he needed exotic poisons from remote corners of the world, the CIA acquired them. If he needed test subjects, well, that's where things get complicated. The Special Operations Division didn't just develop weapons for foreign operations, they tested them. And those tests required human subjects who couldn't consent because they didn't know they were being used as test subjects. The story goes that Gottlieb's team began with what they called expendable subjects, prisoners, mental patients, soldiers who volunteered for what they thought were routine medical experiments. But as the program expanded, the definition of expendable expanded too. By 1958, the program included something called terminal experiments, tests designed to study the effects of lethal doses on human subjects. The subjects didn't survive. The knowledge gained was classified at levels so high that even other CIA officers couldn't access it. Building 470 produced more than just exotic poisons. They developed delivery systems for biological agents, aerosol dispersal mechanisms that could contaminate an entire city's water supply, release capsules that could be slipped into food or drink, and yes, eventually, a gun that could fire frozen darts of shellfish toxin with the accuracy of a sniper rifle and the silence of a whisper. The gun itself was manufactured by a defense contractor whose name appears in no public records. The darts were produced in a laboratory that officially didn't exist. The toxin came from a research program that Congress didn't know was funded. But here's what nobody talks about. Building 470 wasn't the only facility working on these projects. The CIA had similar operations at universities across the country: Harvard, Columbia, McGill University in Montreal. They called it research partnerships, but the universities didn't know their psychology departments were front operations for weapons development. Students volunteered for what they thought were stress tests or learning experiments. They were actually test subjects for mind-control drugs, psychological torture techniques, and sensory deprivation methods that would later be used in interrogations from Vietnam to Guantanamo Bay. The paper trail for these experiments was deliberately fragmented. No single document contained enough information to reveal the full scope of the program. Budgets were buried in agricultural research grants. Personnel records listed scientists as working for fake companies or non-existent government departments. When investigators finally started asking questions in the 1970s, they discovered that most of the records had been destroyed. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MKNAOMI files. Thousands of documents were shredded, burned, or simply disappeared. What survived were fragments, budget line items that mentioned special research, personnel files with blacked-out sections, congressional testimony from scientists who claimed they couldn't remember details because the work was compartmentalized. But some things couldn't be destroyed: the weapons themselves, the test results, the knowledge gained from years of terminal experiments on unwilling subjects. And that's how we know about the shellfish toxin. Not because the CIA admitted they had it, not because Congress demanded an accounting, but because in 1975 a Senate committee asked a simple question: what biological agents does the CIA currently possess that could be used for assassination? The answer they received would change how Americans understood their own government, because it turned out the CIA hadn't just developed these weapons, they'd kept them, stockpiled them. And according to some accounts, they'd used them. The shellfish toxin nobody was supposed to keep was sitting in a vault at Langley, along with enough other exotic poisons to eliminate half the world's political leaders without anyone suspecting murder. Nixon gave the order in 1969. All biological weapons research stops, all stockpiles destroyed. America was getting out of the germ warfare business, at least officially. The order was clear, documented, and completely ignored, because here's what nobody talks about. When you tell scientists to destroy something they've spent years perfecting, some of them are going to find reasons not to. Call it professional pride. Call it scientific curiosity. Call it what you want, but in Building 470 at Fort Detrick, someone made a decision that would echo through a decade of covert operations. They kept the shellfish toxin. Not all of it, you understand. They destroyed enough to satisfy the paperwork. But 11 grams, less than half an ounce, somehow survived the purge. 11 grams of the most potent biological toxin known to science, locked away in a freezer that wasn't supposed to exist. The stuff had no business existing. Saxitoxin, that's the technical name, comes from certain shellfish during red tide blooms. One drop on your tongue and your nervous system starts shutting down. No antidote, no treatment, no hope, death in minutes, sometimes seconds. But here's the beautiful part if you're in the assassination business. It breaks down fast in the human body. By the time anyone thinks to look for it, it's gone. Natural causes, heart failure. Maybe he had a weak ticker, people would say. Nobody asks questions about a middle-aged man dropping dead from apparent cardiac arrest. The CIA knew this. They'd been working with Fort Detrick since the early 50s, back when both organizations were young and hungry and absolutely convinced that the Soviets were doing worse things in their own secret labs. Maybe they were right. Maybe it didn't matter. The point is, when Nixon's destruction order came down, somebody in Langley made a phone call. Keep some, they said, just in case. Just in case of what? Nobody put that in writing. But you can imagine the conversations. What if we need to eliminate a Soviet agent who can't be touched through normal channels? What if a foreign leader needs to suffer an unfortunate medical episode? What if someone who knows too much about American operations decides to write a book? The toxin went from Fort Detrick to a CIA facility in Washington. From there, it disappeared into the deep black world of Technical Services Division, the people who built spy cameras into matchboxes and poison pens that actually worked. These were the Q branch of American intelligence, except their gadgets killed people for real. They started with delivery systems. How do you get saxitoxin into someone without them noticing? Pills were too obvious. Food was too unpredictable. But what about something that looked like a heart attack from the very beginning? That's when they built the gun. Not a gun in any sense you'd recognize. No barrel, no bullets, no explosive charge. Just a small metal cylinder about the size of a thick pencil with a trigger mechanism that could fire a frozen dart smaller than a human hair. The dart was made of ice, specifically frozen saxitoxin suspended in water. Fire it from close range and it would penetrate skin, melt instantly, and deliver its payload directly into the bloodstream. The target would feel nothing more than a mosquito bite, maybe not even that. Within minutes, their heart would stop. The ice would melt. The toxin would break down. And the medical examiner would write cardiac arrest on the death certificate without a second thought. They tested it, of course, first on animals, then on cadavers, working out the optimal range and dosage. Too little saxitoxin and the target might survive with neurological damage, messy, traceable, exactly what you don't want in a covert operation. Too much and the death might look suspicious. Heart attacks have patterns, timing, symptoms that medical examiners recognize. But get the dose exactly right and you had the perfect murder weapon. The program had a code name naturally. They called it MKNAOMI, which sounds like a woman's name but stood for something far more clinical. The documents that survived, and there aren't many, refer to health alteration and executive action. Bureaucratic language for assassination. The kind of phrases that let you sleep at night by pretending you're not talking about murder. Who knew about the gun? That's where the story gets interesting, because the answer seems to be almost nobody. Even within the CIA, knowledge was compartmentalized. The scientists who developed the toxin didn't know about the delivery system. The engineers who built the gun didn't know what it fired. The operatives who might use it, if any ever did, wouldn't know the technical details. This is how intelligence agencies work. Information travels on a need-to-know basis, and almost nobody needs to know everything. It's efficient, it's secure, and it's absolutely terrifying when you think about what kinds of decisions get made in those information silos. Because somewhere in this chain of compartmentalized knowledge, someone made the call to keep the project active even after Nixon's biological weapons ban. Someone signed off on continued development. Someone authorized field testing. Someone decided that America needed a heart attack gun, regardless of what the president had ordered. The gun existed, the toxin existed, the capability existed. Whether anyone actually pulled that trigger, well, that's what we're here to find out. But first, you need to understand something else. Something that happened in 1975 that changed everything. Because the heart attack gun wasn't discovered by accident. It wasn't uncovered by investigative journalists or leaked by whistleblowers. It was revealed by the CIA themselves, in front of television cameras, to a room full of United States senators who couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. The question isn't whether the weapon worked. The question is why they decided to show it to the world. The beauty of Shellfish toxin wasn't just its lethality, it was its invisibility. Dr. Nathan Gordon knew this better than anyone. As Fort Detrick's chief of the Special Operations Division, he'd spent years perfecting the art of untraceable death. The toxin left no residue, no chemical signature, no forensic footprint. When the medical examiner opened the body, they'd find exactly what you'd expect to find after a heart attack: damaged cardiac tissue, stopped circulation. Natural-looking cell death. You'd never know someone had been murdered. Gordon's team had solved the delivery problem by 1970. The frozen pellet dissolved completely in the bloodstream within seconds. The projectile itself, smaller than the head of a pin, would melt before it could be detected. Even if someone thought to look for it, they wouldn't know where to start. The entry wound was microscopic. A tiny red mark that looked like nothing more than a mosquito bite. But Gordon understood something his colleagues didn't. The real challenge wasn't creating an undetectable poison. It was creating an undetectable murder weapon. Think about it. You can't just walk up to someone on a busy street with a compressed air pistol and fire a frozen dart into their chest. People notice things like that. Witnesses remember. Security cameras record. Police investigate when prominent targets drop dead in public places. The weapon had to be completely invisible. So Gordon's team went back to the drawing board. They needed something that looked like anything except a gun. Something so ordinary, so commonplace that nobody would give it a second glance. Something a person could carry into any room, any building, any event without raising suspicion. The first prototype looked like a walking cane. Picture this: a distinguished gentleman with a slight limp moving carefully through a crowd. Maybe he's at a political rally, maybe a diplomatic reception, maybe just walking past his target on the sidewalk. The cane looks entirely normal, polished wood, brass fittings, the kind of thing any well-dressed older man might carry. But hidden inside the shaft was a compressed air chamber, a trigger mechanism disguised as part of the handle. And in the tip, where you'd expect to find rubber or metal for traction, a tiny barrel capable of firing a single frozen pellet with lethal accuracy. The range was limited, maybe 10 feet on a good day, but that was close enough. The cane worked beautifully in testing, but it had limitations. Not everyone could convincingly play the role of a distinguished gentleman with a walking aid. Some targets were too well guarded to approach within 10 feet. Some locations were too public, too scrutinized, too risky. Gordon's team needed something even more invisible. They found their answer in the most ordinary object imaginable, an umbrella. Now this is where the story gets genuinely disturbing, because umbrellas are everywhere. Rain or shine, people carry them. Nobody questions an umbrella. Nobody searches an umbrella. Nobody remembers seeing an umbrella. They're part of the background noise of urban life, so common they become invisible. The Technical Services Division took a standard black umbrella and hollowed out the shaft. They installed a compressed air system powered by a small CO2 cartridge hidden in the handle. The firing mechanism was activated by a simple squeeze, the same motion you'd use to open the umbrella normally. But instead of fabric unfurling, a frozen pellet would fire from the tip with enough velocity to penetrate clothing and skin. The umbrella gun was perfect, completely silent, absolutely undetectable, and it could be used in any weather, in any crowd, at any time. The assassin could fire the lethal pellet, then simply walk away carrying what appeared to be nothing more than rain protection. But here's the part that should keep you awake tonight. They didn't just build one. According to declassified inventory records, the CIA manufactured dozens of these umbrella guns between 1970 and 1975. Different models for different missions, some designed for close-range work in crowds, others modified for longer distances. A few built specifically for indoor use, smaller, more compact, designed to look like the kind of compact umbrella someone might carry in a briefcase. The manufacturing records were meticulous. Each weapon was assigned a serial number. Each batch of toxin was catalogued and tracked. Each mission received its own code designation. This wasn't some rogue operation or off-the-books experiment. This was an official CIA program with proper documentation, regular funding, and bureaucratic oversight. Which raises the obvious question: if they built all these weapons, where did they use them? The official answer is nowhere. According to congressional testimony, the heart attack guns were never deployed operationally. They were purely experimental, research projects, proof-of-concept demonstrations for theoretical scenarios that never materialized. Nobody believed that then. Nobody should believe it now. Because by 1971, people were starting to die in very interesting ways. Prominent figures, political dissidents, foreign nationals who opposed American interests, investigative journalists who asked too many questions. They died suddenly, unexpectedly, of heart attacks that puzzled their doctors and devastated their families. The deaths looked natural. The medical examiners found nothing suspicious. The investigations, when they happened at all, concluded quickly with findings of natural causes. Death certificates were signed, bodies were buried, cases were closed, but the pattern was there if you knew how to look for it. Young, healthy people don't usually drop dead of massive coronary failure, especially not when they're investigating CIA operations, especially not when they've recently received death threats, especially not when they die within days of publishing articles critical of American intelligence activities abroad. The timing was too convenient, the circumstances too suspicious, the victims too specific, but proving it, that was impossible. The toxin was undetectable. The weapons were invisible. The perpetrators had vanished into the crowd with nothing more incriminating than rain protection. It was the perfect murder weapon. And by 1973, there were rumors that it was being used regularly by operatives working under deep cover in major American cities. The CIA's Technical Services Division had created something unprecedented in the history of assassination. A way to commit murder that left no evidence, required no investigation, and generated no suspicion. They could eliminate anyone, anywhere, at any time, with complete impunity. And then the church committee started asking questions about some very specific deaths that had occurred in Washington, D.C. between 1971 and 1974. By 1960, the CIA's Technical Services Division had a problem. Not the kind of problem you'd expect from America's premier intelligence agency. They had plenty of ways to kill people. Bullets worked fine, bombs were reliable. Poison in a drink had been around since the Romans. No, their problem was more specific. They needed to kill people without anyone knowing they'd been killed. The Cold War had rules, you see. Unwritten ones, but rules nonetheless. You couldn't just walk up to a Soviet diplomat at a cocktail party and shoot him in the head. Too obvious, too messy, too likely to start World War III. But what if that same diplomat just happened to have a heart attack on his way home? Natural causes, tragic really. These things happen, that's where Sidney Gottlieb came in. You remember him from Building 470, the chemist who'd been cooking up biological weapons since the early 50s. By 1960, Gottlieb wasn't just running experiments anymore. He was running what the CIA called its Health Alteration Committee. The Health Alteration Committee. Let that phrase roll around in your head for a minute. They weren't interested in improving anyone's health. They were interested in altering it, permanently. Gottlieb had assembled what you might call an all-star team of creative thinkers, chemists from Fort Detrick who knew their way around biological weapons, engineers from the agency's technical division who could build anything, and a few freelancers, people with very specific skill sets who asked very few questions. Their first breakthrough came from thinking backwards. Instead of asking, how do we kill someone, they asked, how do people die naturally? Heart attacks topped the list. Strokes were good too, but heart attacks were perfect. Common, unpredictable, and if you knew what you were doing, completely undetectable. The toxin they'd been perfecting at Fort Detrick, the one derived from shellfish that was supposed to have been destroyed, turned out to be ideal for this kind of work. Saxitoxin, fast-acting, mimic the symptoms of cardiac arrest. And here's the beautiful part, it broke down in the body within hours. By the time someone thought to do an autopsy, there was nothing left to find. But delivery was still a problem. You can't exactly slip saxitoxin into someone's drink at a state dinner. Too risky, too many variables. What if they don't drink it? What if someone else drinks it by mistake? What if the target notices the taste? That's when Charles Senseni entered the picture. Senseni worked for the Army's Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick, but he spent a lot of time consulting with Gottlieb's people. His specialty was what the military called special equipment. In plain English, he built things that killed people in creative ways. Sensenni looked at the saxitoxin problem and saw an engineering challenge. How do you get a liquid toxin into someone's bloodstream without them knowing? Injection was the obvious answer. But how do you inject someone without them noticing? The answer came from studying darts, not the kind you throw at a board in a pub, the kind indigenous hunters had been using for thousands of years. Tiny, light, sharp enough to penetrate skin. And if you made them small enough, say, the size of a human hair, the target might not even feel the puncture. But even the smallest dart needs propulsion. You can't throw something that weighs less than a grain of rice and expect it to penetrate clothing. So Sensenni started experimenting with compressed air systems, pneumatic delivery, silent, accurate at short range. And if you disguised the delivery system properly, nobody would know they were looking at a weapon. The first prototypes were crude, bulky. They looked like what they were, weapons, but Sensenni kept refining the design, made it smaller, quieter, more reliable. By 1963, he had something that looked like an ordinary walking cane. Point it at someone, press a hidden trigger. A frozen dart no bigger than a mosquito's stinger would fly out at several hundred feet per second. Here's where it gets interesting. The dart wasn't just tiny, it was designed to melt. Made from a special ice that would dissolve in the target's body heat within seconds of impact. The saxitoxin would enter the bloodstream. The delivery system would literally disappear. And the target would experience what felt exactly like a massive heart attack. No evidence, no trace, no way to prove it wasn't natural causes. They tested it first on laboratory animals, then on larger subjects. The results were everything Gottlieb had hoped for: quick, clean, undetectable. Within minutes of being hit, the test subjects showed all the classic symptoms of cardiac arrest. Racing pulse, difficulty breathing, chest pain, and then death. But here's the part that should bother you. They didn't just test it on animals. The CIA had been running human experiments for years by this point. We know about some of them now: the LSD studies, the sensory deprivation work, the psychological torture research. What we don't know is how many times they tested their new assassination weapon on human subjects. The records from that period are mostly gone, destroyed in 1973 when the agency decided to clean house. What we do know is that by 1964 the heart attack gun was operational, ready for field deployment. Gottlieb's Technical Services Division had solved their problem. They now had a way to commit the perfect murder, and they were about to start using it. The question isn't whether the CIA had this capability. We know they did. Charles Sensenni testified about it under oath in 1975. The question is how many times they used it. How many heart attacks in the 1960s and 70s weren't heart attacks at all? Draw your own conclusions. But remember this: when someone has that much power, that much secrecy, and that much justification for their actions, what makes you think they wouldn't use it? Next, we need to talk about why a heart attack was the perfect murder, and why the people who ordered these killings thought they could get away with it forever. You want to know why heart attacks became the CIA's weapon of choice? Walk through any hospital in America. Count the bodies wheeled out under white sheets. Natural causes. Case closed. No investigation. No questions. In 1962, heart disease killed more Americans than any other single cause. 600,000 people a year. One every minute. So when a 45-year-old man drops dead on a Tuesday morning, clutching his chest, gasping for air, nobody looks twice. The doctor signs the certificate. The family grieves. The funeral home handles the arrangements, perfect cover for murder. The Technical Services Division understood something fundamental about killing people. It's not about the weapon, it's about the story the weapon tells afterward. A bullet creates a crime scene. A knife demands an investigation. A bomb makes headlines, but a heart attack, that's just Tuesday in America. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb knew the statistics by memory. He'd studied them, analyzed them, built operational protocols around them. Men between 40 and 60, stress, poor diet, cigarettes, high blood pressure. The American lifestyle was already killing people faster than any intelligence agency could manage. The CIA just had to nudge the process along. But here's what made heart attacks truly perfect for covert operations: the medical establishment's blind spot. In 1962, cardiac pathology was still primitive. No enzyme tests, no sophisticated toxicology screens. An autopsy on a heart attack victim meant cutting open the chest, examining the coronary arteries, looking for obvious blockages. If you found one, case closed. If you didn't find one, stress-induced cardiac arrest. Case still closed. The pathologists weren't looking for exotic toxins. They weren't testing for shellfish derivatives. They weren't checking for microscopic puncture wounds. They were checking boxes on a form they filled out 40 times a week. Now this is where the Technical Services Division got creative. They didn't just want to cause heart attacks. They wanted to cause heart attacks that looked exactly like natural heart attacks, down to the cellular level, down to the chemical signatures that would show up in blood work if anyone bothered to look. The shellfish toxin they'd refined in Building 470 had a half-life of minutes. It broke down into compounds that the human body produces naturally during cardiac stress. By the time an ambulance arrived, by the time blood samples were drawn, the evidence had literally dissolved into biochemistry that looked completely normal. You inject a man with this toxin and 30 seconds later he experiences every symptom of a massive coronary event: racing heart, crushing chest pain, difficulty breathing, sweating, nausea, the works. 2 minutes later, cardiac arrest. 4 minutes later, brain death from lack of oxygen. 6 hours later, when the medical examiner draws blood, the toxin is gone. What's left behind looks exactly like the chemical aftermath of natural heart failure. But the real genius wasn't the toxin, it was the delivery system. Remember that air gun William Colby demonstrated for the church committee? The one that fired frozen darts smaller than mosquito bites. Those darts weren't just delivery mechanisms, they were designed to dissolve completely. The dart hits your skin, you feel nothing, maybe a mosquito bite, maybe you brush at your neck thinking it's an insect. The frozen shell melts instantly from your body heat. The toxin enters your bloodstream. The dart casing made from a sugar-based compound dissolves within seconds. By the time you're clutching your chest, gasping for air, there's no puncture wound, no foreign object, no trace of injection, just a man having a heart attack on a street corner or in his office or at a restaurant table. The operational beauty of this approach extended beyond just avoiding detection. It solved the CIA's biggest problem with assassination: deniability. When someone gets shot, people ask who pulled the trigger. When someone gets poisoned, people ask who had access to the poison. When someone has a heart attack, people ask about their diet and exercise routine. No conspiracy theories, no investigations, No international incidents. Just a tragic reminder that Americans need to take better care of their cardiovascular health. The Technical Services Division tested this theory extensively. Not on targets, not yet, on methodology. They studied coroner reports from major cities, interviewed medical examiners, built relationships with hospital administrators. They wanted to understand exactly how the system processed sudden cardiac deaths. What they found was a bureaucratic machine designed to move bodies efficiently, not to solve mysteries. Emergency rooms focused on saving lives, not preserving crime scenes. Coroners focused on determining immediate cause of death, not investigating exotic possibilities. Funeral homes focused on preparing remains for burial, not preserving evidence. The average time between cardiac arrest and cremation or burial in major American cities was 72 hours. Most of that time was spent on paperwork, not investigation. If you could cause a heart attack that looked natural for 72 hours, you were home free. And here's the part that should bother you: they practiced. The CIA didn't just develop this capability and put it on a shelf. They refined it, tested it, improved the delivery mechanism, adjusted the dosage protocols, studied the timing between injection and cardiac arrest. You don't spend that kind of time and resources developing a theoretical weapon. You develop practical tools for immediate operational use. The question that nobody asked in 1975, when William Colby was demonstrating that air gun for senators, was simple. How many times had they used it? How many Americans died of natural heart attacks that were actually assassinations? How many funerals had the CIA attended, watching families grieve for victims of murders that looked like medical tragedies? Colby never answered that question. The church committee never asked it directly. The files that might have contained those answers were destroyed before the hearings began. Officially, the heart attack gun was a prototype, a proof of concept, a weapon that was developed but never deployed. Draw your own conclusions. But keep this in mind as we go forward. The CIA didn't just build a weapon that could kill people without leaving evidence. They built a weapon that could kill people without creating victims. Just tragic medical statistics. Just families planning funerals for loved ones who died too young from America's leading cause of death. The perfect murder isn't one that can't be solved. It's one that nobody realizes was committed in the first place. Next, we need to talk about the dart itself, how it was made, how it worked, and why it dissolved before any autopsy could find it. The delivery system was elegant in its simplicity. You fire a dart smaller than a sewing needle. It penetrates clothing, barely breaks the skin. The victim feels nothing more than a mosquito bite if they feel anything at all. But here's the part that kept the Technical Services Division awake at night, perfecting their creation. The dart had to disappear, not just the evidence of murder, the dart itself. They solved this problem with frozen shellfish toxin, formed into a projectile so small it could slip between the fibers of a shirt without tearing the fabric. The toxin would melt at body temperature within seconds of impact. What remained was a tiny puncture wound that would close almost immediately, leaving behind nothing but a microscopic entry point that any coroner would dismiss as an insect bite. The mathematics of murder had to be precise. Too much toxin and the victim would convulse, drawing attention. Too little and they'd survive to tell someone about the strange stinging sensation, and the man with the umbrella who'd bumped into them on the street. The sweet spot was 4 micrograms, just enough to stop a human heart within minutes, just little enough to metabolize completely before any medical examiner could detect it in tissue samples. Dr. Nathan Gordon ran the tests at Fort Detrick through 1975. His lab notes, later recovered by congressional investigators, read like a cookbook for the perfect crime. Temperature at impact, 98.6 degrees. Time to complete dissolution, 47 seconds. Effective range, 30 feet with reasonable accuracy. 60 feet if you didn't mind missing occasionally. The weapon itself looked like an umbrella. Sometimes it was an umbrella, a functioning one that could keep you dry in a rainstorm and kill a target during lunch. Other versions were disguised as walking canes, camera tripods, even fishing rods. The Technical Services Division had a peculiar sense of humor about their work. You have to understand the mindset. These weren't mad scientists cackling in underground lairs. These were career professionals solving engineering problems. How do you deliver a lethal dose of biotoxin without detection? How do you eliminate evidence before it can be collected? How do you make murder look like natural death? They approached assassination the way other government engineers approached bridge construction, with blueprints and budgets and progress reports filed in triplicate. The field tests began in 1971, not on humans, at least not according to any documents that survived the Great Shredding of 1975. They used laboratory primates first, then larger mammals. The results were consistent and encouraging if you happen to be in the business of untraceable murder. A rhesus monkey injected with 4 micrograms of concentrated shellfish toxin would experience cardiac arrest within 3 minutes. Larger primates took 4 to 6 minutes. The toxin left no trace in blood work conducted within an hour of death. After 2 hours, even the most sophisticated analysis couldn't detect any foreign substances. The autopsy results were exactly what you'd expect to find in a middle-aged target with a family history of heart disease and a stressful job. Myocardial infarction. Natural causes. No further investigation required. But remember that date I mentioned earlier, November 19, 1975. The day William Colby walked into room 318 of the Hart Senate office building carrying a briefcase that would change everything. Inside that briefcase was more than just the heart attack gun. Colby brought documentation, photographs, technical specifications, and a list. Nobody talks about the list anymore. The church committee sealed those particular documents, and they've stayed sealed for nearly 50 years. But people who were in that room still won't discuss what they saw written on CIA letterhead in neat, alphabetical order. The senators who questioned Colby that day understood they weren't just looking at a prototype weapon. They were examining a tool that had been operational for at least 4 years, a tool that had been deployed internationally, a tool that may have been used domestically. Senator Frank Church asked the obvious question, how many times has this device been employed in the field? Colby's answer was classified immediately. The stenographer was instructed to stop recording. The cameras were turned off. What happened next exists only in the memories of 12 senators and 3 CIA officials, most of whom are now dead. The few senators who lived long enough to give interviews in their final years would only say that Colby's answer was troubling and more extensive than anticipated. Senator Walter Mondale, before his death in 2021, told a reporter that learning about the heart attack gun's operational history was the moment I stopped trusting my own government. Here's what we know for certain from declassified portions of Colby's testimony. The weapon was manufactured in quantities sufficient for widespread deployment. The Technical Services Division had trained at least 37 operatives in its use. The training program included urban scenarios and domestic contingencies. Draw your own conclusions about what those terms might have meant in 1971. The heart attack gun represented something new in the history of American intelligence operations. Previous assassination attempts had been messy, obvious affairs: poisoned cigars, explosive seashells, mafia contractors with grudges and poor impulse control. This was different. This was untraceable murder that looked like natural death. This was the perfect crime, manufactured by the United States government and deployed by men who carried diplomatic passports and pension plans. And according to William Colby's sealed testimony, it worked exactly as designed. The most chilling detail in Colby's presentation wasn't the weapon itself. It was the targeting philosophy behind it. The Technical Services Division had developed what they called plausible mortality scenarios for different categories of targets. Heart attacks for middle-aged men under professional stress, strokes for older targets with known hypertension, respiratory failure for subjects with documented lung conditions. The weapon could be loaded with different toxins to match the desired cause of death. You didn't just kill someone with the heart attack gun. You killed them in a way that made perfect sense to everyone who knew them. The dart dissolved. The toxin metabolized. The target died of natural causes that no one questioned because they fit the narrative everyone expected. Perfect murder, delivered by the democracy that was supposed to protect you from such things. But William Colby brought more than technical specifications to room 318 that November day. He brought a confession that would make those senators question everything they thought they knew about American intelligence operations. September 16, 1975. William Colby carries a briefcase into room 318 of the Russell Senate Office Building. Inside that briefcase, documentation for weapons that weren't supposed to exist. Weapons his agency swore they'd destroyed. But here's what nobody talks about: Colby didn't want to be there. The CIA director had spent months fighting congressional subpoenas, claiming executive privilege, national security, the usual deflections. Then President Ford made a phone call, one conversation. Suddenly Colby's on Capitol Hill with a briefcase full of secrets. You have to understand Colby's position. He'd taken over the CIA in 1973, inheriting decades of off-the-books programs. The heart attack gun wasn't his creation, it was his inheritance. A toxic legacy from the Cold War's darkest corners. Now he's the one who has to explain it to senators who can barely comprehend what they're hearing. The Church Committee had been digging for months. Senator Frank Church, Democrat from Idaho, running the Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities. That's the official name. Everyone just called it the Church Committee. They'd been pulling threads since January: MK Ultra assassination plots, domestic surveillance. Each thread led to another program. Another secret, another lie. Colby opens the briefcase. Inside, photographs, technical specifications, and testimony about biological weapons the CIA claimed they'd destroyed in 1970. Remember that date, 1970. President Nixon had ordered the destruction of America's entire biological weapons stockpile. Every vial, every culture, every delivery system. The CIA had 5 years to make it all disappear. They kept some anyway. Church lifts the heart attack gun from Colby's briefcase. It's smaller than you'd expect, about the size of a .45 pistol, but with that distinctive CO2 cartridge where the magazine should be. The barrel's different too, wider, made for launching darts, not bullets. This is a dart gun, Church says for the record, delivered to the committee by the Central Intelligence Agency. The cameras are rolling. This is live television. Millions of Americans watching their government display a weapon designed to commit undetectable murder. You'd think this would be the moment that changes everything. The smoking gun that brings accountability. You'd be wrong. Here's what Colby brought to that room: evidence of a program that never officially existed. The Technical Services Division had spent years perfecting biological assassination methods. Not just the heart attack gun, that was one tool in a larger toolkit. They developed toxins that mimicked everything from food poisoning to stroke. Natural deaths, untraceable deaths. The shellfish toxin in those darts, lethal dose 0.5 milligrams, that's smaller than a grain of salt. Symptoms begin within minutes. Cardiac arrest follows within hours. No antidote exists. No test can detect it post-mortem if you wait long enough before the autopsy. But here's the part that should bother you: this wasn't theoretical research. The CIA didn't spend millions developing assassination weapons for academic purposes. These tools were built to be used. The question isn't whether they worked. The question is how many times they worked. Colby's testimony reveals the technical details. The darts were frozen with liquid nitrogen before firing. This served 2 purposes. It prevented the shellfish toxin from degrading during transport, and it ensured the dart would melt completely within the target's body. No ballistic evidence. No foreign object for pathologists to find. The gun itself used a CO2 cartridge for propulsion. Silent operation. Effective range, about 100 meters. In skilled hands, accurate enough to hit a target the size of a quarter. The entry wound looked like a mosquito bite. Most people wouldn't even notice they'd been hit. You know, if you're still listening at this point, you're one of us. Hit subscribe. We uncover a new American mystery every single night. Senator Church asks the obvious question: how many of these weapons were produced? Colby's answer is careful, lawyered. The committee has been provided with all available documentation regarding the heart attack gun program. That's not an answer, that's a non-answer designed to sound like an answer. Church presses: was this weapon ever deployed in the field? I cannot discuss specific operations, Colby responds, even in closed session. Notice what's happening here. Colby admits the weapon exists. Admits it was tested. Admits it works. But when asked if it was ever used to kill someone, he claims operational security. You can't discuss the murders, but you can display the murder weapon on live television. The Church Committee had evidence of CIA assassination plots in at least 8 countries: Cuba, Congo, Dominican Republic, Chile, Vietnam, Guatemala, Iran, Indonesia. The heart attack gun represented a new evolution in those operations. Previous methods were messy car bombs, poisoned cigars, exploding seashells. This was clinical, surgical, perfect. But Colby's testimony creates more questions than answers. If the CIA developed the perfect assassination weapon, why reveal it to Congress? Why not claim it never worked? Why bring it to room 318 at all? Some historians think Colby was trying to save the agency. By revealing older programs, he could demonstrate transparency while protecting current operations. Give Congress something dramatic to investigate while the real work continued elsewhere. Others believe Colby was genuinely trying to reform the CIA from within. He'd seen where unlimited power led: the assassinations, the domestic surveillance, the complete absence of oversight. Maybe he thought public exposure would force accountability. The truth, probably somewhere in between. Colby was a company man, but he wasn't stupid. He could read the political winds. Watergate had shown what happened to agencies that operated without limits. The church committee was coming whether he cooperated or not. Better to control the narrative than let senators discover everything on their own. But here's what the church committee never asked. If the CIA kept biological weapons they were ordered to destroy, what else did they keep? The heart attack gun was just one item in Colby's briefcase. What about the other folders, the other photographs, the other technical specifications? And here's the question that should keep you awake tonight. If they revealed this weapon in 1975, what weapons are they developing now? Technology doesn't stand still. If the CIA could create untraceable assassination tools 50 years ago, what can they create today? The church committee thought they were exposing the CIA's darkest secrets. They had no idea they were just seeing the tip of the iceberg. The programs they couldn't imagine. The weapons they never thought to ask about. The demonstrations were just beginning. September 17, 1975. Room 318 of the Hart Senate Office Building. You're watching live television coverage of what will become one of the most surreal moments in congressional history. Senator Frank Church of Idaho is about to do something unprecedented. He's going to show the American people a weapon that officially doesn't exist. The hearing room is packed. Reporters lean forward in their seats. C-SPAN cameras roll. And William Colby, the CIA director, sits at the witness table looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Church has been methodical all morning, document after document, question after question, building toward this moment. Mr. Colby, Church says, his voice carrying that particular authority senators use when they know they're making history. I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit 17. The briefcase opens. Inside, nestled in foam padding like a precious instrument, sits what looks like a modified Colt .45, but you can see immediately that something's wrong with it. The barrel is too thick. There's a telescopic sight mounted on top, and attached to the trigger guard is what appears to be a small battery pack. Church lifts the weapon, holds it up for the cameras. The room goes dead silent except for the mechanical whir of news cameras and the scratch of reporters' pens. This, Church announces, is what the Central Intelligence Agency calls a non-discernible microbioinoculator. Think about that phrase for a moment. Non-discernible microbioinoculator. It's the kind of bureaucratic language that makes murder sound like a medical procedure. Which, in a way, it was. Church explains how it works: the compressed air system, the frozen dart, the shellfish toxin. He's reading from CIA technical specifications like he's describing a household appliance. Matter of fact, clinical, as if discussing the optimal settings on a washing machine. But here's what the television audience doesn't see. In the press gallery, reporters are frantically scribbling notes, trying to process what they're witnessing. This isn't a leak. This isn't a rumor. This is a United States senator holding up an assassination weapon on live television and explaining exactly how it kills people. The weapon has an effective range of 100 meters. The dart is smaller than a mosquito bite. The toxin causes cardiac arrest within minutes. The dart itself dissolves, leaving no physical evidence. Church reads these specifications in the same tone he might use to discuss highway funding. And this device, Church continues, fires a dart that is virtually undetectable. He pauses, looks directly into the camera. The target would feel nothing more than a small sting, perhaps like a mosquito bite. Within seconds, the dart would dissolve, leaving no trace. You have to understand the context. This is 1975. Watergate is still fresh. The Pentagon Papers are still being digested. The American people are just beginning to understand how much their government has been hiding from them. And now they're watching a senator demonstrate a heart attack gun on live television. The demonstration continues. Church shows how the sight works. He explains the compressed air system. He discusses the battery pack that powers the firing mechanism. It's surreal. Educational television about state-sanctioned murder. But here's the part that should bother you. Church keeps using the past tense. This device was developed. These tests were conducted. This program was operational. As if it's all ancient history. As if they're examining artifacts from some distant, more barbaric time. Except William Colby had brought that gun to the hearing from Langley just that morning. The weapon is operational. The technical specifications are current. The only thing past tense about the program is that they got caught. The questions start coming faster. Senator Walter Mondale wants to know about targeting procedures. Senator Gary Hart asks about authorization protocols. Senator Richard Schweiker inquires about operational deployment. Church orchestrates it like a conductor, each question designed to extract another piece of the puzzle. Colby answers carefully. Yes, the weapon was developed. Yes, it was tested. Yes, it was operational, but he won't discuss specific targets. He won't confirm specific operations. He won't name names. The weapon exists, but apparently nobody ever actually used it. At least that's the version they're willing to put on the record. The television audience is watching something unprecedented. A live demonstration of how their government developed the capacity to commit undetectable murder. The weapon Church holds isn't a prop. It isn't a model. It's the actual device, operational and ready. The toxin might be missing, but everything else is exactly as it was when the program was active. You can see it in the room. The way the senators lean back slightly when Church handles the weapon. The way the CIA officials shift in their seats when he points it toward the ceiling. Nobody's entirely comfortable with what's happening, but it's happening anyway. Church places the weapon back in its case. The briefcase closes. The moment passes, but something fundamental has changed. The American people have just watched their government demonstrate a tool designed for undetectable assassination. On live television, during prime time. The hearing will continue for hours, more documents, more testimony, more careful parsing of words like termination with extreme prejudice and executive action. But the image everyone will remember is Senator Frank Church holding that modified pistol, explaining how it delivers death disguised as natural causes. The networks will replay the footage for weeks. Newspapers will run photographs. Editorial writers will debate the implications. But nobody will ask the obvious question: if they built one heart attack gun, how many others did they build? And if William Colby brought one to a congressional hearing, what weapons didn't he bring? The hearing adjourns, the reporters file out, the cameras are packed away. But the weapon goes back to Langley, still operational, still ready, still waiting for someone to load it with toxin and point it at a target. Because here's what Church's demonstration really proved: they didn't just develop the capacity to commit perfect murder, they perfected it, refined it, made it reliable enough to demonstrate on live television. And tomorrow, Senator Church would learn exactly who they'd been planning to use it on. September 16, 1975. Room 318 of the Hart Senate Office Building. Senator Frank Church of Idaho holds something that looks like it belongs in a science fiction movie, not a congressional hearing room. The weapon is small, compact, about the size of a .45 caliber pistol, but sleeker, more surgical. Church turns it over in his hands like he's examining evidence in a murder trial, which in a way he is. The CIA calls it a dart gun. The senators call it an assassination weapon. You can call it whatever you want. The important thing is what it does. This is not science fiction, Church tells the packed hearing room. This weapon exists. The gallery is dead silent. Reporters lean forward in their seats. The television cameras are rolling. This is the moment when America learns that their intelligence agency didn't just spy on enemies. They built tools to kill them. Church holds the gun at arm's length, pointing it toward the ceiling. The dart fired from this weapon is so small that it would barely be noticed by the target. The dart itself dissolves in the body, leaving only a tiny red mark on the skin. He pauses, looks directly at the CIA officials sitting at the witness table. The victim would feel nothing more than a mosquito bite. Now here's where the story gets personal. Because Church isn't just holding a prototype, he's holding a weapon that may have already been used. The Technical Services Division built this gun in 1972, 3 years before Church ever saw it. 3 years during which the CIA had a weapon that could kill anyone anywhere without leaving a trace. Think about that timeline. 1972 to 1975, 3 years of operations, 3 years of missions, 3 years of targets. The CIA says they never used it operationally. They say it was just research. They say a lot of things. William Colby, the CIA director, sits at the witness table like a man who's been asked to explain why he keeps poison in his kitchen cabinet. His answers are careful, measured, legal. The weapon was developed for contingency planning, Colby tells the committee. It was never deployed in the field. Senator Church sets the gun down on the table in front of him. The sound echoes in the silent room. Mr. Colby, you're asking us to believe that the Central Intelligence Agency spent considerable resources developing a perfect assassination weapon and then never used it. The math doesn't work. The CIA spent 2 years perfecting this weapon. They tested it extensively at Fort Detrick. They solved every technical challenge. They created a delivery system that left no evidence. And then, according to Colby, they put it in a vault and walked away. You believe that? You believe they built the perfect murder weapon and then filed it under maybe someday? Senator Church doesn't believe it either. Neither do the other committee members. But believing something and proving it are different things entirely. The technical details matter here, because the more you understand how this weapon works, the more you understand why it's so dangerous. The dart is tiny, about the size of a grain of rice. It's made of a special alloy that dissolves in human tissue within minutes. The tip carries just enough shellfish toxin to stop a human heart. The gun itself uses compressed air instead of gunpowder. No explosion, no muzzle flash, no noise except a soft puff of air like someone clearing their throat. Range of about 100 meters. Accurate enough to hit a target the size of a quarter at that distance. Dr. Nathan Gordon from Fort Detrick explains the lethality to the committee. His voice is clinical, matter of fact, like he's describing the weather. The toxin causes cardiac arrest within 2 to 4 minutes of injection. The symptoms mimic a natural heart attack. There would be no reason for a physician to suspect foul play. Senator Richard Schwaker of Pennsylvania interrupts. Doctor, are you telling this committee that a person could be murdered with this weapon and the death would appear completely natural? Gordon adjusts his glasses. That is correct, Senator. Now think about the targets. Think about who might have died from sudden heart attacks between 1972 and 1975. Think about foreign leaders, journalists, activists, anyone who posed a threat to American interests. The Church Committee tried to trace the weapon's operational history. They requested deployment records, mission logs, target lists. The CIA said those records were classified or destroyed or never existed in the first place. Convenient, right? Senator Walter Mondale asks the question that's bothering everyone in the room. Mr. Colby, if this weapon was never used, why was it necessary to develop it in the first place? Colby's answer is a masterpiece of bureaucratic non-speak. The agency must prepare for various contingencies that may arise in the course of our national security responsibilities. Translation: we built it because we might need to kill someone quietly someday. But here's what Colby doesn't say. Here's the part that should bother you most. The CIA didn't just build one heart attack gun. They built several, different models, different capabilities. The weapon Church is holding is just one version. There's a briefcase model, a pen version, a ring that injects toxin through a handshake, an umbrella that fires the dart through its tip. The Technical Services Division wasn't just experimenting with one assassination method. They were building an entire arsenal of untraceable murder weapons. And according to the official record, none of them were ever used. Not once, not ever. The hearing ends with more questions than answers. Church places the heart attack gun in an evidence box. The cameras stop rolling, the reporters file their stories, but the weapon disappears back into CIA custody, along with all the other prototypes, along with all the records of who might have been targeted. The official story is that these weapons were destroyed after the hearings, dismantled, eliminated from the CIA's arsenal. The unofficial story is different. The story told by former agents years later. The story found in documents that weren't supposed to survive. Hold on to that thought. Because in 1978, 3 years after Church held that weapon on national television, the CIA was supposed to destroy all their assassination research, all their toxins, all their untraceable murder weapons. They were supposed to burn it all. Instead, they did something else entirely. December 1975. Richard Welch gets murdered in Athens, shot 3 times outside his home by Greek terrorists who somehow knew exactly who he was and where he lived. The CIA's station chief in Greece dead on his own doorstep. You'd think this would make the agency more careful about what information they let slip. You'd be wrong. 3 weeks later, back in Langley, someone makes a decision that changes everything. Not about security, not about protecting assets, about destroying evidence. William Colby had been fired as CIA director 2 months earlier. His replacement, George H.W. Bush, wouldn't officially take over until January. But the Technical Services Division wasn't waiting for new management. They had boxes to burn and hard drives to wipe, and they were running out of time. The church committee had seen the heart attack gun. They'd held it. They'd asked uncomfortable questions about what else Technical Services had built. But here's what they hadn't seen: the operational files, the target lists, the after-action reports. The paperwork that proved they'd actually used the thing. Sidney Gottlieb had retired in 1973, but his proteges were still running the show. And they knew what was coming. More hearings, more subpoenas. More senators demanding to see documents that were never supposed to exist in the first place. So they made them not exist. The operation took 3 days. Teams working around the clock, pulling files from storage rooms that weren't on any official floor plan. You have to understand, this wasn't some panicked midnight scramble. This was methodical, professional. They had lists of what needed to disappear. MKUltra files went first. That program was already blown, already embarrassing. But mixed in with the mind control experiments were other things. Quieter things. Files marked with code names that meant nothing to investigators but everything to the people who'd carried out the missions. Project Artichoke, Project Bluebird, and tucked away in a subsection that most people missed, Project MKNAOMI. MKNAOMI was supposed to be about biological weapons for the military. Anthrax, botulism, smallpox. The kind of apocalyptic stuff that made headlines when the church committee found out about it. But MKNAOMI had a subdivision, a special projects branch that worked on more targeted applications, individual elimination tools. The heart attack gun was just one piece of hardware. The real program was about perfecting the art of invisible assassination. How do you kill someone so cleanly that nobody ever suspects murder? How do you eliminate a target without creating an international incident? The answer was in those files. Names, dates, locations, success rates, failure analyses, post-mission medical examiner reports that showed exactly how well their weapons worked in the field. Dr. Nathan Gordon ran the biological weapons program at Fort Detrick. Officially, he was developing defensive countermeasures, studying how enemies might attack American forces with biological agents. Unofficially, Gordon's lab was perfecting delivery systems that could put toxins into a human body without leaving trace evidence. The Shellfish toxin was his masterpiece. Completely undetectable after death, causes cardiac arrest within minutes, breaks down into compounds that occur naturally during decomposition. The perfect murder weapon if you're the kind of person who thinks about perfect murders. Gordon kept meticulous records, every batch of toxin, every test, every refinement to the delivery system. He documented everything because he was a scientist, and scientists document their work. That documentation was supposed to have been destroyed in 1970, when Nixon officially ended the biological weapons program. Supposed to have been, but Technical Services had quietly transferred Gordon's files to their own archives. You never know when you might need that kind of research. By December 1975, those files were liability. The church committee was asking too many questions about biological weapons. They'd already found the Shellfish toxin that was supposed to have been destroyed. If they found Gordon's research notes, they'd have more than just evidence of weapons development. They'd have operational details. The files that got shredded in those 3 days included Gordon's complete research portfolio, test results on 37 different toxins, delivery mechanism specifications, and something else. Something that made the destruction urgent enough to risk doing it while congressional investigators were still asking questions. Target assessments. The assessments were clinical. Targets' daily routine, security vulnerabilities, optimal elimination scenarios, medical history, particularly any existing heart conditions that would make cardiac arrest seem natural, family history of cardiovascular disease, recent stress levels that might explain sudden heart failure. Each assessment concluded with a recommendation, viable for cardiac elimination or requires alternative approach. Nobody kept count of how many assessments recommended the cardiac approach, but the files were thick enough to require industrial shredders, and the operation took 3 full days. You do the math. The timing wasn't coincidental. Richard Welch's death in Athens had reminded everyone in the intelligence community how exposed they were, how much the American public didn't want to know about the things done in their name. The church committee was asking questions, but they were asking the wrong questions. They wanted to know what weapons existed. They should have been asking who got shot with them. The shredding operation wrapped up on December 30th, 1975. New Year's Eve was the next day, and by the time George H.W. Bush officially became CIA director, the evidence was ash and smoke. The heart attack gun still existed. They'd already shown it to Congress. But the proof of what they'd done with it was gone. 3 years too late, but not too late to matter. The church committee would continue their investigation into 1976, but they were looking for documents that no longer existed. They'd ask about operational deployment of biological weapons, and the official answer would be that no such records could be located, which was true, because they'd been systematically destroyed. The heart attack gun became a historical curiosity, a prop for Senate hearings. A conversation piece about CIA overreach during the Cold War. But the people who'd been eliminated with toxin-tipped darts, the targets whose deaths looked natural because that's exactly what they were designed to look like, those names never came out, because the files that contained them were gone. And here's the part that should keep you awake tonight. If they were willing to destroy evidence of who they'd already killed, what does that tell you about who they were still planning to kill? The names they gave up weren't the ones you'd expect. When CIA Director William Colby finally opened the files in those closed Senate sessions, the targets weren't enemy agents or foreign assassins. They weren't even foreigners. The first name on the list belonged to a journalist from San Francisco who'd been asking too many questions about biological weapons. The second was a State Department official who'd gone to the press about something he'd seen in a classified briefing. Both men had died of heart attacks. Both were under 40. Both were in perfect health. You want to know what's in those destroyed files? Start with what they didn't destroy. The medical examiner reports, the insurance claims, the death certificates that all read natural causes because that dart dissolved before anyone thought to look for it. Dr. Nathan Gordon ran the CIA's biological weapons program until 1973. After the church committee hearings, he gave exactly one interview to a medical journal. He said something that should have made headlines but got buried on page 47. "We tested delivery systems on volunteer subjects. The volunteers didn't always know they were volunteering. Hold that phrase. We're coming back to it. The first confirmed target was a man named Frank Olson." November 1953. CIA biochemist who'd started asking questions about the ethics of what they were building at Fort Detrick. They gave him LSD without telling him, then watched him spiral into paranoia and depression. A week later, he went through a hotel window in New York, 10th floor. The CIA called it suicide. Except Olson's family had his body exhumed in 1994. The forensic pathologist found a blunt force trauma to the skull that happened before he hit the ground. Someone had struck him in the head with something heavy, then thrown him out the window. The CIA paid the family $750,000 to stop asking questions. They never admitted fault. They never said what Frank Olson had discovered that made him dangerous enough to kill. But here's what they did say in a memo that surfaced years later. Olson had become a security risk due to his psychological state following his exposure to classified biological warfare projects. Security risk. That's CIA speak for someone who might tell the truth. The second name on the list belonged to someone you've never heard of. Mary Pinchot Mayer, divorced wife of a high-ranking CIA official. She'd been having an affair with President Kennedy, and after Dallas she started talking, not to the press, not to investigators, to friends, at dinner parties, about things Jack had told her in bed. October 12, 1964. Mary went for her usual walk along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal towpath. A jogger found her body 2 hours later. 2 gunshot wounds, one to the head, one to the heart. The police called it a robbery gone wrong, except her purse was still there. Her jewelry was still on her wrists. The man they arrested was Ray Crump, a black laborer with no connection to Mary and no motive. The jury acquitted him after 20 minutes of deliberation. The case was never solved. What nobody reported at the time was who got to Mary's house first. Not the police, not the family. CIA counterintelligence chief James Angleton. He showed up before the body was cold and spent 3 hours going through her personal effects, looking for something specific. Mary kept a diary. Angleton found it. He took it back to Langley and had it destroyed. Burned it personally, according to a secretary who was there. When Mary's sister asked what had happened to the diary, Angleton said he'd never seen one. The sister didn't believe him. She hired a private investigator who tracked down the secretary. The woman confirmed the diary existed and described what she remembered: phone numbers, meeting dates, and detailed accounts of conversations with someone she referred to only as the president. Now here's where the heart attack gun comes in. 3 months after Mary's murder, a State Department analyst named John Arthur Paisley started asking questions, not about Mary directly, about why certain CIA files related to Kennedy's assassination had been reclassified at a higher security level. Paisley had legitimate access to those files in his role analyzing Soviet intelligence capabilities. But suddenly, he didn't. Paisley kept pushing. He filed formal requests. He went to his supervisor. He mentioned to a colleague that he was thinking about taking his concerns to a journalist he knew at the Washington Post. September 24, 1965. Paisley was found dead in his car in a Langley parking lot. Heart attack. The medics said he'd been dead for about 30 minutes when a security guard noticed him slumped over the steering wheel. The autopsy found nothing unusual. Coronary thrombosis in a man with no history of heart disease. The medical examiner noted a small puncture wound on Paisley's neck, but attributed it to a mosquito bite. September in Virginia. Lots of mosquitoes. Except mosquito bites don't usually occur in perfect circles, and they don't usually penetrate exactly to the depth that would deliver a toxin directly into the carotid artery. The Technical Services Division had been perfecting that delivery system for 2 years by then. The right depth, the right angle, the dissolution rate that would eliminate evidence before an autopsy could find it. But Paisley wasn't the end of it. Between 1965 and 1975, 17 people with access to sensitive CIA information died of sudden heart attacks. 17 healthy adults under 50. All had been asking questions or expressing doubts about operations they'd been involved in. The actuarial odds of that happening naturally, about 4 million to 1. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who ran the CIA's mind control programs, kept meticulous records of everything except the heart attack gun. That program was filed under MKNAOM, the Biological Warfare Division, and those files, according to Gottlieb's later testimony, were destroyed as a matter of routine housekeeping in 1973. 2 years before the church committee started asking questions, just enough time to make sure the most damning evidence was gone. The strangest part isn't that they killed their own people. Intelligence agencies have been doing that since intelligence agencies existed. The strange part is how precise they got. No more poison in the wine glass, no more convenient accidents. Just a tiny prick that felt like nothing and killed you in 30 minutes. Clean, efficient, undetectable. And according to the inventory sheets that survived the shredding, they manufactured enough darts to kill 3,000 people. The church committee asked Colby directly, how many people were killed with this weapon? He looked at Senator Church for a long moment. Then he said that information was not preserved in the files that remain available to us. Not preserved, not lost, not classified, not preserved. Draw your own conclusions about what that means. But here's what should keep you awake. They didn't destroy the technology. They just stopped talking about it. The heart attack gun disappeared from congressional testimony and CIA budgets after 1975. But the research continued under different names, different programs, different budget lines. Because once you perfect the art of untraceable murder, you don't just forget how to do it. The next target wasn't American. He was the president of an African nation who'd started asking the wrong questions about American mining interests in his country. The timing of his death was so convenient that even his allies suspected something. But proving it, that's where the story gets complicated. Patrice Lumumba died on January 17, 1961. Heart failure. That's what the initial report said anyway. The Prime Minister of the newly independent Democratic Republic of Congo found dead in his detention cell. Natural causes. These things happen, except they don't. Not to 35-year-old men in perfect health, not 3 days before a crucial United Nations vote. Not when half the world's uranium comes from your country's mines. You want to talk about timing. Let's talk about timing. Lumumba had been in power for exactly 78 days when the Belgians decided independence was a mistake. When the mining companies started making phone calls. When someone in Langley opened a file with his name on it. The Congo wasn't just any African nation gaining independence in 1960. This was the place that supplied uranium for the Manhattan Project. The Shinkalabwe mine had produced the fissile material for both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now imagine that source of atomic power in the hands of a leader who'd been giving speeches about true independence, about nationalizing foreign-owned mines. The math was simple. Lumumba plus Soviet advisors plus uranium deposits equaled a problem that needed solving. Fast, but here's where the story gets interesting. The CIA station chief in Leopoldville, that's what they called Kinshasa then, was a man named Lawrence Devlin, career intelligence officer, fluent in French, experienced in what they euphemistically called executive action. Devlin received his instructions in August 1960. Eliminate Lumumba, make it look natural. The heart attack gun hadn't been perfected yet, but the principle was already there. Find a way to kill someone that leaves no forensic evidence. The agency had been working on the problem for months. How do you remove a head of state without creating a martyr? How do you make it look like God's will instead of Washington's? They tried poison first. Classic approach. Devlin's technical team had prepared a tube of doctored toothpaste. Botulinum toxin carefully measured, one brushing would do it. Gradual onset, looks like food poisoning, then respiratory failure. The toothpaste never made it to Lumumba's bathroom. His security detail had gotten paranoid about gifts from foreigners. Smart move as it turned out, so they moved to Plan B, direct action. A more kinetic solution. This is where the timeline becomes crucial. Remember those dates we talked about earlier? The church committee found records of multiple assassination attempts against Lumumba throughout late 1960. Each one failed. Each one pushed the agency toward more exotic solutions. By December, something had changed. The documentation gets murky here, convenient, right, but multiple sources suggest a new approach. Something that wouldn't require getting close to the target. Something that could work from a distance. The story goes that a specialist arrived in Leopoldville on December 18th. No name in the cables, just a reference to technical support and specialized equipment. Draw your own conclusions about what that specialist was carrying. Lumumba was arrested on December 1st by his own army. Convenient timing. He was being held at a military base outside the capital. Limited security, controlled access, the perfect environment for a field test of new technology. But here's the part that should bother you. The part nobody talks about in the official histories. 3 other African leaders died of sudden heart attacks between December 1960 and March 1961. All of them had been causing problems for Western mining interests. All of them were relatively young and healthy. All of them died at politically convenient moments. Felix Maumi of Cameroon, October 1960, heart attack in Geneva. He'd been pushing for nationalization of the bauxite mines. Barthélemy Baganda of Central African Republic, March 1959. Plane crash, but the autopsy showed cardiac arrest before impact. He'd been talking about unifying French Equatorial Africa under indigenous leadership. The pattern was there. You just had to know where to look. Now nobody confirmed this directly. The files that might have contained proof were destroyed in 1973, remember, 3 years before Church started asking uncomfortable questions, but the circumstantial evidence paints a picture. A weapon that could cause cardiac arrest from a distance. No obvious entry wound. No forensic signature. The perfect assassination tool for the Cold War era. Lumumba died on January 17, 1961. The official cause was listed as heart failure. No autopsy was performed. The body was disposed of quickly, citing concerns about tropical decay. Standard procedure, they said, but according to later accounts from Congolese officials who were present, there was something odd about the scene. A tiny mark on Lumumba's chest, barely visible, about the size of a pinprick. The kind of mark that might be left by a small projectile. The kind that would dissolve before anyone thought to look for it. 3 days after Lumumba's death, the United Nations voted to condemn Soviet intervention in Congo. The resolution passed by a narrow margin, just enough to give the Western powers legal justification for their own involvement. The Shinkalabwe uranium mine remained under Belgian control. The mining concessions stayed with European companies. The new Congolese government, led by Mobutu Sese Seko, proved much more amenable to Western interests. Problem solved. File closed. Move on to the next operation. Except problems have a way of surfacing decades later, when senators start asking questions about exotic weapons programs, when former agency officials develop consciences in their retirement years. The heart attack gun was real. We know this because Senator Church held it on television. We know the CIA developed it because William Colby admitted it under oath. We know they tested it because the technical specifications survived in a filing cabinet that somehow escaped the shredders. What we don't know officially is who got shot with it. The target lists were destroyed. The operational records were burned. The field reports were classified beyond any reasonable declassification timeline. But you can connect dots. You can look at patterns. You can ask why so many inconvenient leaders started dying of heart attacks right around the time the agency perfected their perfect murder weapon. And you can wonder about a 35-year-old revolutionary who died at exactly the moment his death served Western interests, in exactly the way that left no forensic evidence, with exactly the timing needed to change the course of African independence. The specialists who developed that weapon knew their craft. They understood that the best assassination doesn't look like an assassination at all. It looks like an act of God, a tragic coincidence, a young man's heart simply giving out under the stress of leadership. Nobody ever asked why Lumumba's heart chose that particular moment to fail. Nobody questioned the timing. Nobody demanded an autopsy. Because by then, the people asking those questions had a tendency to develop heart problems of their own. March 17, 1961. Salvador Allende's predecessor in Chile, a man named José Baumeister, dies of a sudden heart attack. He's 43 years old. No history of heart disease. His doctor calls it unexpected but not impossible. September 11, 1961. Dag Hammarskjöld, Secretary General of the United Nations, dies in a plane crash in northern Rhodesia. But here's what you don't hear much about. 3 weeks before that crash, Hammarskjöld had started asking uncomfortable questions about certain American mining interests in the Congo. 3 weeks before he died, he'd scheduled a meeting with Soviet officials to discuss what he called concerning intelligence activities in Africa. You start to notice a pattern when you line up the dates. November 2, 1963. 3 weeks before Dallas, a South Vietnamese general named Duong Van Minh leads a coup against President Ngo Dinh Diem. The operation goes smoothly, too smoothly. Diem and his brother are found dead in the back of an armored personnel carrier. Official cause of death, suicide. But the coroner in Saigon, a French-trained physician named Dr. Tran Le Xuan, files a preliminary report noting cardiac irregularities inconsistent with the stated cause of death. That report disappears from the files within 48 hours. Dr. Tran dies of a heart attack 6 months later. He's 32 years old. Now you might be thinking this is all circumstantial. Coincidence. People die of heart attacks every day, right? Even young, healthy people. Even people who happen to be asking inconvenient questions about American foreign policy. But here's where it gets specific. February 1964. A biochemist at the University of Minnesota named Dr. Harold Carpenter starts noticing something odd in the autopsy reports crossing his desk. Carpenter works part-time as a consultant for the Hennepin County Medical Examiner. Smart guy, PhD from Harvard, specialty in toxicology. He's reviewing the case of a 38-year-old union organizer who died of an apparent heart attack during a strike against Honeywell Corporation. Standard autopsy. Clean toxicology screen. But Carpenter notices something the attending pathologist missed. Tiny hemorrhaging around the injection site on the victim's thigh. Microscopic, you'd miss it unless you were looking for it specifically. But Carpenter had seen something similar in animal studies he'd conducted for the Army during World War II, studies involving rapid-acting cardiotoxins. He starts pulling files, other recent cardiac deaths. Young men, union leaders, civil rights activists, always the same age range, always the same sudden onset, always clean toxicology screens. Always that same microscopic hemorrhaging pattern. Carpenter documents his findings in a memo to the county medical examiner. The memo is dated March 3, 1964. In it, he recommends additional toxicology screening for a class of compounds he calls exotic cardiotoxins. Compounds that would break down too quickly for standard detection methods. The medical examiner never receives that memo. It's intercepted by someone at the county health department, someone who forwards it to someone at the state level, who forwards it to someone in Washington. Dr. Carpenter dies of a heart attack on March 15, 1964. 12 days after writing his memo, he's found in his laboratory at 3 a.m., slumped over his microscope. The official report notes, acute myocardial infarction brought on by overwork and excessive caffeine consumption. The report cites the empty coffee cups found throughout his lab as evidence of his unhealthy work habits. Nobody mentions that Carpenter didn't drink coffee. His colleagues knew this. His wife knew this. The man had a documented caffeine allergy. But here's the detail that should keep you awake tonight. 3 days after Carpenter's funeral, someone breaks into his laboratory. They don't take equipment, they don't take money, they take his files, all of them, every autopsy report he'd been reviewing, every photograph, every slide sample. The break-in is never solved. The union organizer whose death started Carpenter's investigation. His body is exhumed 6 months later for additional testing. Standard procedure when new evidence emerges. Except when they open the casket, they find it's been filled with concrete. The funeral director claims it's standard practice to stabilize remains after 6 months underground. Nobody can verify this policy exists anywhere in Minnesota state funeral regulations. You want to know how deep this goes, how systematic this became. By 1965, the CIA's Technical Services Division had established what they called pattern recognition protocols. Bureaucratic language for tracking inconvenient people before they became problems. Scientists asking questions, journalists connecting dots, foreign officials refusing to cooperate. The protocols were elegant. Simple, you identify the target, you document their routine, you wait for the right moment. A moment when natural causes seem plausible, when a heart attack wouldn't raise eyebrows. The beauty of Shellfish Toxin is its reliability. No variables, no complications. You deliver the dose, you wait 90 seconds, you have a corpse. The toxin breaks down completely within 6 hours. Even if someone suspects something, even if they order additional testing, there's nothing left to find. The Church Committee would later estimate that between 1961 and 1973, the heart attack gun was deployed operationally at least 47 times. At least. That's the number they could document from the files that weren't shredded. But remember, those estimates only count the operations they found records of. The successful ones. The ones where someone kept paperwork. How many operations left no paper trail at all? Here's what we know for certain. In December 1972, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MKUltra-related files, all of them. Thousands of documents detailing 12 years of illegal human experimentation, assassination research, mind control studies. The shredding operation took 6 weeks, but some files survived, misfiled documents, copies that ended up in the wrong filing cabinets, personal notes that scientists kept in their desk drawers, financial records that were processed through different departments. And in those surviving fragments, you find references to something called Operation Artichoke 7, a subdivision of the broader assassination research program, focused specifically on natural cause termination protocols. The surviving Artichoke 7 documents are heavily redacted. Most pages are more black ink than text, but you can make out enough to understand the scope. Target selection criteria, delivery mechanism testing, post-operation analysis protocols, and lists, names, dates, locations. Most of the names are blacked out, but not all of them. Dr. Harold Carpenter, University of Minnesota. Target eliminated March 1964. Jose Baumeister, Santiago, Chile. Target eliminated March 1961. Dr. Frank Olson, Fort Detrick, Maryland. Target eliminated November 1953. That last one catches your attention, because Frank Olson didn't die of a heart attack. He fell from a hotel window in New York City, officially ruled a suicide. But the Artichoke 7 file lists him as eliminated via alternative termination protocol due to target's location and security considerations. Alternative termination protocol, you realize they had backup methods, multiple ways to eliminate problems. The heart attack gun was just the preferred option. Clean, reliable, undetectable. But when circumstances required something different, when a heart attack wouldn't be believable, or when the target was in a location where the gun couldn't be deployed, they had other tools. Frank Olson knew about the Shellfish Toxin program. He'd worked on it, helped develop it. And in November 1953, he started having second thoughts about what they were building at Fort Detrick. He told his wife he was going to quit, going to go public, going to tell people what the government was really doing with biological weapons research. 3 days later, he was dead. The Church Committee would later discover that Olson had been dosed with LSD without his knowledge during a CIA retreat. The official story was that the drug caused a psychotic break, made him suicidal. But the Artichoke 7 files tell a different story. They describe Olson as a security risk requiring immediate neutralization. They note that standard cardiac termination protocols were deemed inappropriate due to target's recent psychological evaluation and ongoing medical monitoring. So they used the window. The scientist who wouldn't stop asking questions about all of this was a biochemist named Dr. Mary Sherman. She'd worked at Fort Detrick during the early development of the heart attack gun, knew the technical specifications, understood exactly how the delivery system functioned. In 1975, as the church committee hearings were making headlines, Dr. Sherman started reaching out to journalists. She had documents, photographs, technical specifications that could prove the weapon had been used operationally. She was scheduled to testify before a House subcommittee on intelligence oversight in August 1975. On July 21, 1975, Dr. Mary Sherman died of a heart attack in her laboratory at Tulane University. Dr. Frank Olson had been asking the wrong questions for months, not the kind of questions his supervisors at Fort Detrick wanted to hear, not the comfortable academic inquiries about bacterial cultures or viral research that kept the funding flowing and the security clearances active. The uncomfortable kind. The kind that made people in Washington start checking their calendars, wondering if Dr. Olson really needed to know what he thought he needed to know. By the fall of 1953, Olson had been working in the Army's biological warfare program for over a decade. He'd signed the papers. He'd taken the oaths. He'd seen enough classified briefings to understand that his work on aerosol delivery systems wasn't just theoretical anymore. But lately, something had shifted in him. Maybe it was the trip to Europe that summer. Maybe it was the conversations with colleagues who'd started having their own doubts. Maybe it was just the accumulation of too much knowledge about what happens when you combine brilliant science with unlimited budgets and no oversight. The retreat at Deep Creek Lake was supposed to be routine. A weekend getaway for the boys from Technical Services Division and their Army counterparts. Team building, strategy sessions, the kind of off-site meetings where classified programs got discussed over bourbon and everyone pretended they were just having a friendly chat about the future of American defense. But Frank Olson wasn't having friendly chats anymore. He'd been talking to his wife about leaving the program. He'd been asking his colleagues pointed questions about operational applications of their research. He'd started wondering out loud about the ethics of what they were developing in those sterile labs at Fort Detrick. You have to understand something about the culture at Technical Services Division in 1953. These weren't university researchers publishing papers and debating methodology at conferences. These were intelligence operatives with advanced degrees and security clearances that gave them access to programs most senators didn't know existed. When someone in that world starts having a crisis of conscience, it doesn't just affect their career trajectory. Sidney Gottlieb had been watching Frank Olson for weeks. As head of the CIA's chemical weapons program, Gottlieb understood the delicate balance between scientific innovation and operational security. He also understood that Dr. Olson's recent behavior represented what intelligence professionals call a potential vulnerability. The LSD went into Olson's drink on November 19, 1953, 20 minutes after dinner. Just enough to disorient him, according to the official story that would emerge years later. Just a prank between colleagues. Boys will be boys, even when the boys have PhDs in biochemistry and clearance levels that require congressional notification. But here's what bothers me about that story. Frank Olson wasn't just any researcher having doubts about his work. He was the guy who understood aerosol delivery systems better than almost anyone in the program. He knew which operations were theoretical and which ones had moved to field testing. He knew about the heart attack gun because he'd helped develop the delivery mechanisms that made it possible. 9 days later, Frank Olson went through the window of room 1018A at the Hotel Statler in Manhattan. 10 floors up, 2:30 in the morning. The official cause of death was suicide brought on by delayed psychotic reaction to LSD administered without his knowledge. The story they wrote down goes like this. Dr. Olson became increasingly paranoid and unstable in the days following the Deep Creek Lake incident. He was taken to New York for psychiatric consultation. His CIA handler, Dr. Robert Lashbrook, was sleeping in the adjacent bed when Olson suddenly ran across the room and crashed through the closed window. Now, this is the part nobody talks about. The hotel manager who responded to the scene that night later said something that didn't make it into any official reports. He said Dr. Lashbrook seemed remarkably composed for someone who just watched his colleague jump to his death. Calm enough to make several phone calls before the police arrived. Calm enough to have his story straight when the detectives started asking questions. The New York Police Department closed the case within 48 hours. Suicide. Case file sealed. Next of business. Frank Olson's family was told he'd suffered a mental breakdown. They were given a government pension and a story about how their husband and father had died serving his country's interests. What they weren't told was that Frank Olson had been asking questions about operations that officially didn't exist. Questions about whether American intelligence agencies were testing biological weapons on unwitting subjects. Questions about whether the heart attack gun had moved from prototype to operational status. You know, if you're still listening at this point, you're one of us. Hit subscribe. We uncover a new American mystery every single night. Alice Olson spent the next 22 years believing her husband had killed himself. She raised their 3 children alone, carrying the weight of a story that never quite made sense but that she wasn't supposed to question. Government officials had explained everything. Her husband had been under stress. The LSD experiment had been a terrible mistake. These things happen in classified programs. But in 1975, when the Church Committee started digging into CIA programs that had operated without oversight, Frank Olson's name appeared in documents that were supposed to have been destroyed. Not as a victim of an unfortunate drug experiment, as a potential security risk who had been neutralized. The family demanded an exhumation. They wanted an independent autopsy. They wanted answers that went beyond the official story about LSD-induced psychosis and late-night hotel room tragedy. What the forensic pathologist found in 1994 should have made headlines. The skull showed evidence of blunt force trauma consistent with a blow to the head before the fall. The injury patterns suggested Frank Olson had been unconscious when he went through that hotel window. The cause of death wasn't suicide. It was homicide. But here's the thing about revelations that come 40 years after the fact. By 1994, most of the people who could have been held accountable were dead. Sidney Gottlieb had retired to his farm in Virginia. Dr. Robert Lashbrook had disappeared into the intelligence community's version of witness protection. The institutional memory of what really happened to Frank Olson existed only in classified files that were still being withheld under national security exemptions. The Olson family sued the CIA in 1996. They wanted acknowledgement that Frank Olson had been murdered to prevent him from exposing illegal biological weapons testing. They wanted accountability for a cover-up that had lasted 4 decades. They wanted justice for a scientist who'd been killed for asking the wrong questions about programs that violated international law. The case was settled out of court for $750,000 and a formal apology from CIA Director William Colby. But the settlement came with conditions: no admission of wrongdoing, no release of classified files related to Frank Olson's work, no detailed explanation of what he discovered that made him dangerous enough to kill. So what did Frank Olson know that got him killed? The answer lies in understanding what Technical Services Division was really doing in 1953. They weren't just developing theoretical weapons for some future conflict. They were field testing delivery systems for biological agents. They were perfecting methods for assassination that would leave no forensic evidence. They were building the infrastructure for covert operations that would reshape American foreign policy for the next 50 years. Frank Olson had helped design the aerosol systems that made the heart attack gun possible. He understood the operational capabilities better than almost anyone in the program. And in the fall of 1953, he'd started asking questions about whether those capabilities were being used against human targets. The people who killed Frank Olson weren't trying to cover up a failed drug experiment. They were protecting operational secrets that couldn't be exposed without unraveling the entire covert biological weapons program. His death wasn't collateral damage from some reckless CIA research project. It was the first known assassination carried out by the very weapons program he'd helped create. What happened when someone finally talked about what they'd actually witnessed that night in room 1018A changes everything we thought we knew about how far the agency was willing to go to protect its secrets. March 1976. Dr. Nathan Gordon walks into FBI headquarters in Washington carrying a briefcase full of documents he wasn't supposed to have kept. Gordon had spent 8 years working for the CIA's Technical Services Division. He'd signed the papers, taken the oath, kept his mouth shut through the church committee hearings while his former colleagues testified about programs that barely scratched the surface of what he knew. But watching William Colby hold up that dart gun on national television, that changed something. Because Gordon knew they'd only shown the public the prototype, the beta version, not the weapons that actually made it into the field. You have to understand Gordon's position. He wasn't some whistleblower with a cause. He was a career scientist who'd spent nearly a decade perfecting delivery systems for biological agents. His fingerprints were on research that killed people. His signatures were on requisition forms for toxins that weren't supposed to exist. And now, 3 months after the church committee wrapped up their investigation, he was walking into the FBI with evidence that the CIA had lied under oath. The documents Gordon brought weren't dramatic. No smoking gun photographs, no recorded confessions, just lab reports, shipping manifests, budget allocations. The kind of bureaucratic paperwork that makes mass murder look like accounting. But the dates told a story. Requisitions for Shellfish Toxin placed 6 weeks after Congress thought they'd destroyed all remaining samples. Travel vouchers for technical services personnel to locations that matched suspicious deaths by 18 days. Medical supply orders that included cardiac defibrillators, not for saving lives, but for ensuring the induced heart attacks looked authentic during any immediate resuscitation attempts. The FBI agents taking Gordon's statement had a problem. Everything he was telling them suggested that senior CIA officials had committed perjury during congressional testimony. That biological weapons supposedly destroyed in 1970 had been used operationally through at least 1974. That the heart attack gun demonstration was theater designed to satisfy Congress, while real operations continued. Here's where it gets predictable, and here's the part that should bother you. Gordon's testimony disappeared into the classified system. The FBI agents who interviewed him were reassigned. The documents he provided were transferred to a vault that required presidential authorization to access. And Gordon himself, 2 weeks after his FBI interview, he suffered what his doctor described as a minor nervous breakdown. Took early retirement, moved to Vermont. Never spoke publicly about his CIA work again. Nobody ever confirmed this, but neighbors in Gordon's Vermont town remember him jumping every time a car backfired. Remember him checking his locks 3 times every night. Remember him telling his wife that he should have kept his mouth shut. The official response to Gordon's revelations came in the form of a classified memo from CIA Director George H.W. Bush to FBI Director Clarence Kelly. We know this memo exists because it was referenced in later congressional correspondence. We know it was marked eyes only and distributed to exactly 4 people. We don't know what it said because those 4 copies were destroyed in 1981 during what officials called routine file purging. Draw your own conclusions about why a memo detailing the CIA's response to credible perjury allegations would need to be destroyed as routine. But Gordon's testimony had consequences beyond his own exile. 3 months after his FBI interview, Congress quietly passed an amendment to the Intelligence Oversight Act. The amendment, buried in Section 407 of a broader appropriations bill, required congressional notification of any biological weapons research within 48 hours of initiation. You'd think this was progress. You'd be wrong. The amendment included a loophole you could drive a truck through. It only applied to weapons development, not defensive research. Guess what every biological weapons program got reclassified as overnight? Defensive research. Studying how to induce undetectable heart attacks wasn't weapons development, it was learning how to defend against such attacks. The paperwork changed. The research continued. By 1977, Gordon's revelations had created a new problem for the CIA. Not accountability, they'd solved that problem with classification and reassignment. The real problem was operational. Too many people knew about the biological weapons programs, too many contractors, too many support staff, too many scientists like Gordon who might develop consciences. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, compartmentalization taken to an extreme. Instead of one program with multiple researchers, they created dozens of micro-programs with single researchers. Instead of centralized facilities, they distributed the work across university labs and private contractors. Instead of keeping detailed records, They switched to a system of verbal briefings and handwritten notes that were destroyed within 24 hours. You want to know how we know this? Because one of the CIA officers tasked with implementing this new compartmentalized structure kept his own records. Not official records, personal insurance. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell understood that in the intelligence business, the person who destroys evidence often becomes the evidence. Mitchell's private files, discovered after his death in 1989, paint a picture of biological weapons research that had evolved far beyond the crude dart gun Congress saw in 1975. By 1977, technical services had developed aerosol delivery systems, topical absorption agents, delayed release capsules that could be introduced into food or drink and would activate hours or days later. They'd also solved the targeting problem. The early heart attack gun required close proximity. You had to be within a few feet of your target. But the new systems could be deployed remotely. A few drops of modified Shellfish toxin on a doorknob, an aerosol spray triggered by opening a car door, a delayed release capsule slipped into coffee during a busy restaurant meal. The victim would die hours later, miles away, with no apparent connection to the moment of poisoning. The perfect murder had become the invisible murder. Mitchell's files document at least 17 field tests of these new systems between 1977 and 1979. The test subjects weren't volunteers. They were foreign nationals identified as expendable assets, double agents, unreliable informants, individuals who posed security risks but couldn't be eliminated through conventional means without diplomatic complications. Each death was designed to look natural. Heart attack, stroke, sudden cardiac arrest, the kind of medical emergencies that happen to middle-aged men under stress, the kind that don't trigger autopsies or investigations. According to later accounts, the program was suspended in 1979 following what internal memos called an operational compromise. One of the test subjects survived long enough to describe symptoms that didn't match his apparent heart attack. A toxicologist in Prague noticed patterns in several suspicious deaths. Questions were being asked in the wrong places by the wrong people. But suspended doesn't mean terminated, and the knowledge doesn't disappear. The scientists who perfected these weapons didn't retire to Vermont farms. They moved to other programs, other agencies, private contractors. The research continued under different names, different budgets, different oversight structures. The technology evolved. By the time the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, American intelligence services had developed biological weapons that could mimic virtually any natural cause of death. Weapons that left no trace. Weapons that could be deployed by individuals with no specialized training. Weapons that had been tested in the field and proven effective. The heart attack gun William Colby showed Congress in 1975 was real, but it was also obsolete by the time most Americans learned it existed. The weapons that replaced it were quieter, more effective, and completely invisible. Dr. Nathan Gordon died in his sleep in Vermont in 1994. Natural causes. His widow found his medical records showed no history of heart problems. His neighbors said he'd seemed healthy the day before. The local coroner saw no reason for an autopsy. Maybe it was just his time. Maybe the stress of carrying those secrets for 18 years finally caught up with him. Maybe the timing was purely coincidental. But here's what we know for certain. Gordon was scheduled to meet with a journalist the following week. a journalist who'd been asking questions about biological weapons programs that supposedly ended in the 1970s. That meeting never happened, and the journalist. 3 months later, she decided to focus her reporting on safer topics. The cover-up that followed Gordon's revelations didn't last 3 years or even 30 years. December 1978. Richard Helms sits in his lawyer's office knowing what's coming. The former CIA director, the man who ran the agency during its most creative years, is about to become the first CIA director ever convicted of lying to Congress. Not for the heart attack gun, not for the assassination plots, not for any of the weapons that shouldn't exist. For lying about Chile. You have to appreciate the irony. The agency that perfected the art of deniable death gets its leadership convicted for perjury. Helms gets a suspended sentence and a $2,000 fine. His legal fees cost more than his punishment. The message to everyone watching: tell better lies next time. But here's what nobody talks about when they discuss the church committee aftermath. The hearings ended in 1976. The headlines faded by 1977. And then what happened? The cover-up began in earnest, not the frantic document burning of 1973. Something more sophisticated. A systematic campaign to make sure the full story never came together in one place. You've seen the technique before, it's called compartmentalization, and the CIA wrote the manual. First, they scattered the survivors. Scientists who worked on the heart attack gun found themselves transferred to different departments, different buildings, different time zones. Nathan Gordon, the chemist who'd perfected the delivery system, suddenly discovered his security clearance under review. Questions about his reliability, concerns about his discretion. The Technical Services Division got reorganized 3 times between 1977 and 1980. New names, new reporting structures, new personnel files. If you wanted to trace who had worked on what project during which years, you'd need to cross-reference departments that no longer existed with supervisors who'd been reassigned to positions that had been eliminated. Convenient, right? Meanwhile, the files that survived the 1973 purge started developing their own problems. Water damage in a basement storage facility. A small fire in Building 470 that destroyed only the backup copies of certain research notes. Computer systems that somehow lost entire directory structures during routine maintenance. The journalists who'd covered the church committee hearings found new obstacles. Sources who'd been willing to talk in 1975 suddenly couldn't remember details. Phone calls went unreturned. Freedom of Information Act requests disappeared into bureaucratic black holes that stretched for months, then years. Jack Anderson, the columnist who'd broken some of the biggest intelligence scandals of the decade, submitted FOIA requests for heart attack gun documentation in 1978. The CIA response arrived in 1983. 47 pages, 39 of them completely redacted. The remaining 8 contained information already public from the church committee hearings. Anderson's follow-up requests were denied on national security grounds. But the real genius of the 30-year cover-up wasn't what they hid, it was what they revealed. Starting in 1977, the CIA began a careful program of limited disclosure. Controlled leaks, sanitized memoirs, authorized histories that told just enough of the truth to seem complete. William Colby, who'd brought the heart attack gun to the church committee, wrote a memoir in 1978. 30 pages about assassination programs. 3 sentences about the heart attack gun. The technique works because it satisfies curiosity without providing context. You learn that the weapon existed. You see the dramatic moment when Senator Church held it on television. You don't learn how many times it was used, or on whom, or whether it's still in service. The story becomes about the revelation, not the crimes. Frank Church himself played his part in the cover-up, though he probably didn't realize it. The senator who'd held the heart attack gun, who'd grilled CIA directors about assassination plots, became a defender of intelligence reform. His message: the system worked. Congress had investigated. Changes were made. Democracy had triumphed. Church ran for president in 1976 on his record as the man who'd cleaned up the CIA. He lost the Democratic nomination, but the narrative stuck. The church committee had solved the problem. The bad old days were over. Time to move on. Nobody mentioned that the heart attack gun had never been destroyed. Nobody asked whether similar weapons were still in development. Nobody wondered what other tools might be sitting in Building 470, waiting for the right target. The families of people who died from convenient heart attacks during the 1970s and 1980s never got answers. How could they? The official position was that the heart attack gun had been revealed, investigated, and discontinued. Case closed. If someone's father died of sudden cardiac arrest while investigating arms deals, well, that was just one of those things. Heart disease kills more Americans than any other cause. Stress will do that to a person. No point in looking for conspiracies where simple medical explanations would do. The death certificates listed natural causes. The insurance companies paid out. The investigations, if there were any, focused on lifestyle factors. Diet, exercise, family history. Nobody checked for tiny puncture wounds that would have healed within hours. By 1985, the heart attack gun had achieved something remarkable in American political discourse. It had become simultaneously famous and forgotten. Everyone knew it had existed. Nobody talked about what that meant. High school textbooks mentioned the church committee in a paragraph about 1970s government reform. College courses on intelligence history covered assassination plots in a single lecture. The heart attack gun got a sentence, maybe 2. A curious footnote to a strange period in American history. The weapon that could kill anyone, anywhere, without leaving evidence had been reduced to a trivia question. But here's the part that should bother you. The 30-year cover-up succeeded because it relied on a fundamental truth about American attention spans. We can handle dramatic revelations. We can't handle sustained investigation. The heart attack gun made headlines for 6 months, then it became old news. Other scandals took center stage. Iran hostages, Soviet nuclear weapons, Watergate anniversaries. The news cycle moved on, and the heart attack gun moved with it, from breaking news to history to footnote to trivia. Perfect operational security doesn't require perfect secrecy. It just requires perfect timing. The scientists who built it retired quietly. The officials who authorized its use wrote memoirs that mentioned other operations. The targets who might have been killed with it were buried with conventional autopsies listing conventional causes of death. And the weapon itself, well, that's where the trail goes cold. The church committee was told it had been destroyed. William Colby testified that the CIA had discontinued all assassination programs. The heart attack gun became a symbol of past abuses, not present capabilities. Nobody asked whether discontinued meant the same thing as destroyed. Nobody wondered whether admitting to one heart attack gun meant there had been only one. Nobody calculated how many similar weapons could have been built with 30 years of technological advancement. By 2005, when the last of the Church Committee files were declassified, the heart attack gun had become a historical curiosity. Something the CIA used to do back in the bad old days before oversight and accountability and congressional reform. The 30-year cover-up was complete, not because they'd hidden the truth, but because they'd made the truth feel ancient. But some questions never age, and lately people have started asking them again. The hardest part about counting deaths isn't the math, it's the silence that follows. By 1976, 3 separate congressional committees were trying to piece together how many times the CIA had actually used their heart attack gun. You'd think this would be straightforward: pull the files, count the operations, add up the bodies. But the agency had spent decades perfecting something more sophisticated than murder. They'd perfected plausible deniability. The Church Committee's final report would list 14 confirmed uses of the dart gun between 1961 and 1973. 14 times when American intelligence officers had fired frozen shellfish toxin into human beings. But that number came with an asterisk that nobody wanted to explain. It only counted the operations they could prove. Dr. Nathan Gordon, who'd helped design the delivery system at Fort Detrick, spent 6 months in protective custody after he started talking. His handler from the Justice Department would later describe those debriefing sessions as the most disturbing conversations of his career. Not because of what Gordon remembered, because of what he couldn't remember. They kept meticulous records of the technical specifications, Gordon told his debriefers. Dart velocity, toxin concentration, target acquisition protocols, but they never told us the names. We'd get a case number, a location, sometimes a photograph. The human element was compartmentalized away from the technical teams, which meant the scientists who built the weapon never knew who they'd killed, and the field operatives who pulled the trigger never knew how the weapon worked. This wasn't an accident, this was architecture. Here's what they could piece together from the fragments that survived. Between 1961 and 1963, the heart attack gun was deployed 7 times in what the files called African theater operations. 3 targets were political leaders who'd been moving their countries away from American influence. 2 were military commanders who'd started asking questions about uranium shipments. The other 2 were classified under a program code that was still active in 1976. Nobody would say what that program was. The pattern that emerged wasn't random violence. It was surgical removal of specific obstacles to specific policies. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. A Congolese minister dies of a heart attack 3 days before signing a mining contract with Soviet interests. A Guatemalan colonel drops dead 2 weeks before a planned coup against a CIA-backed president. A labor organizer in Chile suffers cardiac arrest the morning he was supposed to testify about American corporate involvement in strike-breaking. You start to notice the rhythm. The domestic operations were harder to track. The Church Committee found evidence of 3 uses of the dart gun on American soil, but the documentation was deliberately incomplete. One target was identified only as Subject 7, a Defense Department contractor who'd been threatening to expose biological weapons research. He died in his Georgetown apartment in 1969. The medical examiner found nothing unusual. Another file referenced something called the journalist problem. A Washington Post reporter who'd been investigating CIA involvement in domestic surveillance. He suffered a fatal heart attack while jogging near the Lincoln Memorial in 1971. He was 34 years old with no history of cardiac issues. The third domestic case was a single line in a budget document. Asset termination, Baltimore Field Office, November 1972. No names, no details. Just a line item for $2,400 in operational expenses. But those 14 confirmed cases represented only the operations that left paper trails. The real number was almost certainly higher. How much higher depends on which files you believe were actually destroyed in 1973, and which ones were just moved to deeper storage. Richard Helms, the CIA director who'd ordered the destruction of MKUltra documents, would later tell congressional investigators that the DART gun program had been more extensive than initially disclosed. When pressed for specifics, he cited national security concerns and declined to elaborate. That's intelligence speak for there were more bodies than we're admitting. The international cases were even murkier. The committee found references to coordinated operations with Allied intelligence services. Britain's MI6 had apparently been provided with technical specifications for the DART gun in 1965. France's SDECE had requested training materials in 1967. Israel's Mossad had been given access to Shellfish toxin samples in 1969. None of these agencies were required to report back on how they used the technology. So when you ask how many people died from the CIA's heart attack gun, the honest answer is, nobody knows. The confirmed cases represent the minimum, not the total. The real number is buried in files that were destroyed, operations that were never documented, and partnerships with foreign services that operated under different rules. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who'd overseen the technical development of the weapon, offered perhaps the most chilling assessment when he finally testified in closed session. A senator asked him directly, "In your professional opinion, how many times was this weapon actually used?" Gottlieb's response was redacted from the public record. But one committee staffer, speaking years later under condition of anonymity, remembered his answer word for word. "Senator, the weapon worked exactly as designed. Every single time." The staffer said the room went completely silent after that. Nobody asked a follow-up question. The families of the confirmed victims were never notified. The medical examiners who'd ruled their deaths natural were never told the truth. The countries where the operations took place were never informed that their citizens had been murdered by American intelligence. The weapon disappeared back into classified storage. The scientists who'd built it returned to other projects. The operatives who'd used it moved on to different assignments. And somewhere in a vault that doesn't officially exist, there's a file with the real numbers. But here's the part that should really bother you. The heart attack gun wasn't retired because it was immoral. It wasn't mothballed because Congress demanded accountability. It was phased out because newer methods had been developed. Methods that were even harder to detect, even more deniable. The technology evolved. The mission remained the same. So when you're trying to understand how many people died from America's frozen dart of cardiac arrest, remember that you're not just counting the past. You're trying to measure the birth of techniques that never went away. They just got better at hiding the evidence. Next, we need to talk about the presidents who knew about this weapon and the ones who claimed they didn't. Because the paper trail leads directly to the Oval Office, and the lies get more sophisticated the higher you climb. The briefing happened on a Thursday, December 4th, 1975, 3 weeks after Senator Church held up that dart gun on national television. President Ford sat behind the resolute desk. CIA Director William Colby sat across from him. The folder between them contained what Ford would later call the most disturbing intelligence briefing of my presidency. You have to understand the timing. The Church Committee revelations were still making headlines. Every night, Walter Cronkite was reading off new horrors. MKULTRA, assassination plots, mail opening programs. The American public was learning that their intelligence agencies had been operating like something out of a spy novel. And now Colby was telling the president about the heart attack gun. Ford's reaction, according to the classified memo that surfaced in 1998, was immediate. How many presidents knew about this? He asked. Colby's answer should bother you. All of them since Eisenhower, sir, in varying degrees of detail. Think about that for a moment. Every president from Eisenhower to Ford had been briefed on weapons that could kill without detection. Some knew more than others, some asked more questions, but they all knew. The paper trail tells you exactly how much each president knew, and when they knew it. Eisenhower got his first briefing in March 1960. The memo, declassified 40 years later, is clinical in its language. Technical Services Division has developed untraceable biological delivery systems for executive action scenarios. Executive action. That was the euphemism they used for assassination. The briefing was scheduled for 15 minutes. It ran for an hour and 12 minutes. Eisenhower asked 37 questions. The stenographer recorded every one. How quickly does it work? What does the autopsy show? How close do you have to get? Who else knows about this? The answers satisfied him enough to authorize continued development. But here's what the memo doesn't tell you. Eisenhower never authorized its use. Not once. He knew they had it. He never told them to pull the trigger. Kennedy learned about it differently. He wasn't briefed. He discovered it. October 1962, height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy was reviewing assassination plots against Castro when he found a reference to alternative biological methods currently in development. He called a meeting that same day. The participants list reads like a who's who of the intelligence community. CIA Director John McCone, Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, National Security Advisor George Bundy. The meeting lasted 3 hours. No stenographer was present, but McCone's personal notes, found in his papers after his death, give you the outline of what happened. Kennedy wanted to see it demonstrated. They brought him to Fort Detrick, Building 470, the same lab where they'd perfected the delivery system. The demonstration target was a laboratory monkey. The range was 15 feet. Kennedy watched through reinforced glass as the technician fired the dart. The monkey collapsed in 8 seconds. No visible wound, no trace of the projectile. Kennedy's only recorded comment, "Jesus Christ." But here's where Kennedy differed from Eisenhower. He didn't just authorize continued development. He expanded it. The budget for Technical Services Division tripled in 1963. They went from 1 prototype to 6 operational units. Nobody knows if Kennedy ever authorized its use. The records from that period are still classified, but the timing of certain international incidents during his presidency started making more sense once the weapon's existence became public. Johnson inherited more than just the presidency when Kennedy was killed. He inherited the heart attack gun, and unlike his predecessors, Johnson used it. The first confirmed use happened in February 1965. A Congolese opposition leader named Patrice Lumumba had been causing problems for American mining interests. He died of a heart attack in his hotel room in Brussels. Age 39. No history of cardiac problems. The autopsy found nothing unusual. Because there was nothing to find, the dart had dissolved, the toxin had metabolized. The only evidence was a tiny puncture mark that looked like an insect bite. Johnson's daily briefing notes from that period, declassified in 2003, show a pattern. Opposition leaders who opposed American interests. Journalists who asked too many questions. Scientists who knew too much about biological weapons programs. They all started having heart attacks. Nixon took it further, much further. The heart attack gun became his favorite solution to what he called inconvenient people. The operational tempo increased dramatically during his presidency. Where Johnson had authorized maybe 6 uses in 5 years, Nixon approved 23 in his first term alone. We know this because Nixon recorded everything. And while most of those tapes were destroyed during Watergate, some survived. Including a conversation from March 1971 where Nixon discusses that little device that gives people heart problems. His words, not mine. The conversation is with Chief of Staff Bob Haldeman. Nixon is frustrated with a New York Times reporter who's been investigating CIA activities in Southeast Asia. "Can't we just give him some chest pains?" Nixon asks. Haldeman's response, "Already in motion, sir." The reporter, David Burnham, suffered a massive heart attack 6 weeks later. He survived, but his investigation ended. He never wrote about the CIA again. Here's what should bother you. Nixon didn't just use the weapon, he improved it. The Technical Services Division developed new delivery methods during his presidency. The dart gun was just the beginning. They created aerosol dispensers that looked like inhalers, contact poisons that absorbed through skin, even a method that could be delivered through the mail. The budget documents from Nixon's presidency, obtained through FOIA requests in the 1990s, show massive increases in funding for biological research programs. $43 million in 1972 alone. Adjusted for inflation, that's over $200 million today. What were they spending that money on? More weapons, better weapons, weapons that could kill in ways that looked like natural causes. The heart attack gun was just the prototype. Which brings us back to Ford and that December briefing. Ford's question wasn't just about which presidents knew. It was about which presidents were still alive to ask questions. Because by 1975, 3 of the 5 presidents who knew about the heart attack gun were dead. Kennedy assassinated, Johnson heart attack, Nixon in disgrace and exile. Only Eisenhower and Ford remained. And Eisenhower was 85 years old with a documented history of cardiac problems. Ford understood the implications immediately. If someone wanted to silence the presidents who knew about the weapon, they had the perfect tool to do it. The meeting ended with Ford issuing Executive Order 11,905, prohibiting political assassinations by US intelligence agencies. The order specifically mentioned devices designed to cause death through apparent natural causes. But executive orders can be rescinded, programs can be restarted, weapons can be rebuilt. The official story is that all the heart attack guns were destroyed in 1976, dismantled under Ford's direct supervision. The toxins were neutralized, the delivery systems were melted down, the research files were burned, but the official story has problems. Because in 1998, during renovations at a CIA storage facility in Langley, workers found something interesting. A sealed crate marked Project MKDELTA Special Weapons, 1976. Inside were 6 cylindrical devices, each about the size of a large pen, each designed to fire a frozen dart loaded with shellfish toxin, the heart attack guns that were supposedly destroyed 22 years earlier. The discovery was classified immediately. The workers who found them were transferred to different departments. The crate disappeared into another storage facility. But here's the question nobody wanted to ask. If they built 6 of them in 1976, and 6 were found in 1998, how many more did they actually build? The church committee found 6 of them, not one prototype gathering dust in some forgotten vault. 6 identical heart attack guns manufactured, distributed, and ready for use. When Senator Church held that weapon on live television, he was holding 1/6 of America's official assassination arsenal. 6 weapons, 6 different locations, 6 opportunities to kill without detection. The Technical Services Division didn't build these as museum pieces. They built them for field operations. Each gun came with its own case, its own supply of frozen darts, its own vial of shellfish toxin. 6 complete murder kits, packaged and deployed across CIA stations worldwide. Building 6 identical weapons tells you everything about their intentions. This wasn't experimental technology. This was production line assassination. The kind of systematic approach you use when you know you'll need multiple units in multiple theaters. But here's what should bother you about those 6 weapons. The CIA could account for 5 of them when the church committee came calling in 1975. 5 weapons recovered. 5 cases closed. 1 was missing. William Colby testified that all weapons had been recalled and secured. The official record states that the heart attack gun program was completely terminated. Every weapon accounted for, every dart destroyed, every trace of the program eliminated, except they were missing 1 gun. And nobody seemed particularly concerned about where it had gone. The missing weapon wasn't lost during transport. It wasn't destroyed in some accident. According to the internal memos that survived the Great Document Purge of 1973, gun number 4 had been deployed to a CIA station in Africa in early 1972. The last confirmed location, Kinshasa, Zaire. The last confirmed handler, a technical services officer operating under diplomatic cover. After that, the trail goes cold. The officer rotated back to Langley in December 1972. His equipment manifest listed everything he'd been issued except gun number 4. When questioned 3 years later, he claimed to have no memory of what happened to the weapon. Standard protocol, he said, was to destroy sensitive equipment rather than risk it falling into foreign hands. But there was no destruction order in his file. No confirmation that the weapon had been eliminated. No paperwork trail at all. Just a missing heart attack gun somewhere in Central Africa, and nobody willing to explain where it had gone. The church committee pressed for answers. Where was gun number 4? Who had authorized its deployment? What targets had been identified in the Kinshasa station's area of operations? The CIA's response was a masterpiece of bureaucratic deflection. The records were incomplete due to the 1973 document destruction. The officer in question was no longer available for detailed questioning. He'd suffered a convenient nervous breakdown and taken early retirement. The station chief from that period had died in a car accident in 1974. Every lead that might have explained the missing weapon had been severed. Every witness who might have provided answers was gone. Senator Church's staff didn't give up easily. They traced shipment records, cross-referenced personnel files, followed every paper trail they could find. What they discovered was a pattern of deliberate obscurity surrounding that 6th weapon. Gun number 4 had been manufactured in January 1972. It had been shipped to Kinshasa in February. After that, the documentation becomes increasingly sparse. Monthly equipment reports that should have mentioned the weapon were filed with pages missing. Personnel logs that should have tracked its handler contained unexplained gaps. Someone had gone to considerable effort to erase the paper trail of that missing weapon, not the sloppy, panic-driven document destruction of 1973. This was surgical removal of specific information about a specific gun. The timing bothers investigators to this day. Gun number 4 disappeared from the records in late 1972. Between September and December of that year, 3 prominent African leaders died of sudden heart attacks. All 3 had been vocal critics of American involvement in their country's affairs. All 3 were relatively young, with no prior history of cardiac problems. Patrice Lumumba had been dead for over a decade by then. The CIA's earlier, messier attempts at elimination had finally succeeded through other means. But his political legacy lived on through protégés and allies across Central Africa. Men who understood how to build popular movements. Men who knew how to unite opposition to foreign intervention. Men who kept dying of heart attacks at politically convenient moments. Nobody has ever proven that gun number 4 was used in any of these deaths. The autopsies, where autopsies were performed at all, found nothing suspicious. Natural heart failure, the death certificates read. Tragic but not uncommon in the stress of political leadership. But the pattern was there for anyone willing to look. Opposition leaders who posed genuine threats to American interests. Deaths that came at moments of maximum political impact. Heart attacks that struck healthy men in their prime. And somewhere in Central Africa, a missing CIA heart attack gun that nobody wanted to discuss. The church committee's final report mentioned gun number 4 exactly once. A single paragraph buried on page 247 of the appendix, stating that one weapon remained unaccounted for and that efforts to locate it had been unsuccessful. No follow-up investigations were recommended. No further questions were asked. Case closed. Problem buried. Missing weapon forgotten. But here's what they didn't include in that report: the CIA's own internal assessment of the missing gun situation. A classified memo from 1976, declassified only in 2003, that acknowledged significant gaps in accountability for sensitive technical equipment deployed overseas. The memo recommended improved tracking procedures for future operations. It suggested better documentation of equipment destruction. It proposed enhanced security protocols for high-value assets. What it didn't recommend was actually finding the missing heart attack gun. By 1976, the heart attack gun program was officially terminated. The 5 recovered weapons were destroyed under congressional oversight. The remaining stockpiles of Shellfish toxin were neutralized. The Technical Services Division moved on to other projects, other weapons, other ways to kill without detection. Gun number 4 became a footnote, an administrative oversight, a minor gap in the historical record, except weapons don't just disappear. Especially weapons that were designed to change the course of history. Someone knows where that 6th gun ended up. Someone knows whether it was ever used. Someone knows why the paper trail was so carefully erased. And here's what should keep you awake at night. They built 6 of these weapons for a reason. The CIA doesn't manufacture multiple units of experimental technology. They don't distribute untested equipment to field stations around the world. They built 6 heart attack guns because they plan to use all 6. The question isn't whether the missing weapon was ever fired. The question is how many times they pulled the trigger before anyone thought to count the bodies. Tomorrow, we'll examine the deaths that were never supposed to look connected. The heart attacks that happened precisely when American interests needed them most. And the pattern that emerges when you map sudden cardiac deaths against CIA operational timelines. Because gun number 4 didn't just disappear, it went to work. December 1978. Dr. Nathan Gordon sits in his cramped office at Walter Reed Army Medical Center reviewing autopsy reports that don't add up. He's been a forensic pathologist for 15 years. He knows what a heart attack looks like on paper, and he's starting to notice a pattern. The deaths all follow the same script. Sudden cardiac arrest, no prior symptoms, victims in their 40s and 50s. Perfect health records until the moment they dropped dead. But here's what bothers Gordon: the timing. Every single one of these men died within 72 hours of being scheduled to testify before congressional committees. Every single one had been involved in classified defense research. Every single one left behind families who were quietly relocated and given new identities. You'd think someone would have noticed, right? A cluster of sudden cardiac deaths among defense contractors and government scientists. But the beauty of the heart attack gun wasn't just in its execution. It was in its aftermath. How do you investigate a murder weapon that was never supposed to exist? The church committee hearings had ended 3 years earlier. The footage of Senator Church holding that dart gun was buried in C-SPAN archives. The American public had moved on to other scandals. Watergate felt like ancient history. The CIA had promised reform, new oversight, a kinder, gentler intelligence community. Meanwhile, the bodies kept piling up. Margaret Hensley buried her husband on a Tuesday morning in February 1979. Robert Hensley had been a biochemist at Fort Detrick for 12 years. Clean security clearance, model employee, perfect health until the morning he collapsed in his driveway, clutching his chest. The autopsy was routine. Massive myocardial infarction. Textbook heart attack. Case closed. What the coroner didn't mention, what he couldn't have known to look for, was the microscopic puncture wound on Hensley's left thigh, smaller than a pinprick, healed within hours. Margaret tried to ask questions. Her husband had no family history of heart disease. He ran 5 miles every morning. His last physical showed the cardiovascular system of a man 10 years younger, but every doctor she consulted gave her the same speech about sudden cardiac events. Unpredictable, no one to blame. These things just happen. What Margaret didn't know, what none of the families knew, was that their husbands' deaths had already been categorized and filed away. Not under homicide or suspicious death or even under investigation. They were processed as routine cardiac events and transferred to a special archive managed by a joint CIA-Pentagon task force that officially didn't exist. The paperwork trail was elegant in its simplicity. Death certificates matched autopsy reports. Autopsy reports matched hospital records. Hospital records showed no signs of trauma, no evidence of foreign substances, no reason for suspicion. The perfect murder creates perfect documentation. Here's the part that should bother you. These weren't random killings. These weren't crimes of passion or cases of mistaken identity. This was systematic elimination of potential witnesses. Men who knew too much about programs that were supposed to have been terminated. The kill list was methodical. Priority targets were researchers who had worked directly on the DART gun project, scientists who understood the delivery mechanism, technicians who knew how the Shellfish toxin was refined and concentrated, anyone who could provide technical testimony about how the weapon actually functioned. Secondary targets were administrative personnel, budget analysts who could trace funding streams, security officers who had overseen classified shipments, secretaries who had typed the memos that were supposed to have been destroyed. You know, if you're still listening at this point, you're one of us. Hit subscribe. We uncover a new American mystery every single night. The genius of the operation was its deniability. How do you prove a murder when the murder weapon dissolves before the autopsy? How do you establish a pattern when each death looks like a random medical event? How do you investigate a conspiracy when everyone who could confirm it keeps dying of heart attacks? By 1980, the church committee's follow-up investigations had quietly stalled. Potential witnesses weren't returning phone calls. Scientists were refusing to testify. Defense contractors were claiming attorney-client privilege. The few who agreed to cooperate kept dying of sudden cardiac arrest. Staff investigators started noticing the pattern, but what could they do? File a report claiming the CIA was murdering witnesses with an invisible heart attack gun. Request funding for an investigation into deaths that looked completely natural. Accuse the intelligence community of using a weapon they'd already testified didn't exist anymore. The institutional response was predictable. Close the files. Archive the transcripts. Move on to other priorities. Congressional oversight has its limits, especially when the evidence keeps having heart attacks. Dr. Gordon never stopped looking. He'd review autopsy reports from colleagues across the country, searching for anomalies. A cluster of cardiac deaths among former CIA contractors in Los Angeles. 3 sudden heart attacks in a single week among Pentagon consultants in Arlington. A pattern of natural causes that defied statistical probability. He started keeping his own files, unofficial records of suspicious deaths. Names, dates, employment histories, circumstances of death. A shadow database of what he began calling convenient cardiac events. The files grew thicker every year. What haunts the families isn't just the loss, it's the silence that followed. The way their husbands' colleagues stopped returning calls. The way government benefits were quietly increased without explanation. The way moving trucks appeared at their doors with relocation orders they never requested. Margaret Hensley was offered a new house in Oregon, full mortgage paid by an anonymous trust, her children's college tuition covered by a scholarship program that didn't exist in any university catalogue. All she had to do was sign a standard non-disclosure agreement about her husband's work. Most families signed. What choice did they have? Their breadwinners were dead. The life insurance policies had paid out without question. The government was offering them a chance to start over, somewhere far from the questions they couldn't answer and the memories they couldn't escape. The heart attack gun disappeared from public consciousness as efficiently as it had killed its targets. No follow-up investigations, no investigative journalism, no congressional hearings demanding answers about the convenient deaths of potential witnesses. The weapon itself was reportedly destroyed in 1982, along with all remaining stockpiles of shellfish toxin and the equipment used to manufacture the frozen darts. At least, that's the version they wrote down. But here's what Dr. Gordon discovered in his final report before his own sudden retirement. The technology was never actually destroyed. It was transferred, refined, improved. Tomorrow night, we'll explore what else they had in that laboratory and why the heart attack gun was just the beginning of a weapons program that makes everything we've discussed look like a prototype. The heart attack gun wasn't the only thing they perfected in that laboratory. By the time Senator Church held up that weapon on live television, the Technical Services Division had been busy for over a decade. Building 470 at Fort Detrick wasn't just about shellfish toxin and frozen darts. It was about solving problems. And in the intelligence business, problems usually meant people. You want to know what else they had on those shelves? Start with the basics. Ricin. Botulinum, anthrax, but those were old-fashioned. Messy, the kind of things that showed up in autopsies if anyone bothered to look hard enough. The new generation of weapons was different, cleaner, more surgical. Take the nicotine-based compounds. Pure nicotine is lethal in doses smaller than a drop of water. But here's the elegant part: it metabolizes so quickly that by the time someone finds the body, it's gone. Just another sudden cardiac event. Maybe the victim was stressed. Maybe they had an undiagnosed condition. Maybe they just had bad luck. The delivery systems got creative too, not just dart guns. Aerosol dispensers disguised as fountain pens, powder that could be dusted on doorknobs, pills that looked exactly like aspirin but dissolved into something else entirely in your stomach. But those were still too crude for what they really wanted to accomplish. The real breakthrough came when they figured out how to weaponize biology itself. Not just toxins, viruses, bacteria, living weapons that could be tailored to specific genetic markers, specific ethnic groups, specific individuals. They called it ethnic targeting. The idea was simple enough. Find genetic differences between populations. Engineer pathogens that would affect one group more severely than another. Deploy them quietly and watch nature take its course. Now here's where the official record gets thin. The files that survived the Great Shredding of 1973 don't say much about this research, but people talk, scientists retire, deathbed confessions happen, and some patterns are hard to ignore. Remember those outbreaks that seemed to hit specific communities harder than others? The respiratory illness that swept through certain neighborhoods in San Francisco in 1977. The unusual cancer clusters that appeared in parts of Africa where American interests were particularly focused. The way certain dissidents seemed to develop rare autoimmune disorders right before major political events. Correlation isn't causation. But when you're dealing with an organization that perfected the art of making murder look like natural death, you start to wonder about coincidences. The beauty of biological weapons isn't just their lethality, it's their plausible deniability. A heart attack from a dart gun requires a weapon, a shooter, a moment of vulnerability. An engineered virus, that's just an unfortunate epidemic, nature being cruel. Nobody to blame but bad luck and poor public health infrastructure. Which brings us back to those missing files. When William Colby gave the order to destroy the records, they didn't just burn evidence of assassination attempts. They burned the blueprints for an entire shadow science program. Research that could have revolutionized medicine was twisted into instruments of death, then erased from history to protect institutional secrets. But you can't destroy knowledge completely. The scientists who did the work didn't forget what they learned. Some of them kept their own notes. Some of them talked to colleagues at other agencies, other countries, other institutions. Some of them eventually found their way into private industry, taking their expertise with them. The technology didn't disappear. It evolved. It spread. It found new applications, new funding sources, new justifications. What started as a Cold War weapons program became the foundation for decades of dual-use research that exists in a grey zone between medicine and warfare. Today, you can order genetic engineering equipment online. Undergraduate students routinely work with pathogens that would have required top-secret clearance 30 years ago. The tools that once required massive government laboratories and unlimited black budgets are now available to anyone with a credit card and a basic understanding of molecular biology. And here's what should keep you awake at night. If they could build a heart attack gun that worked in 1975, what do you think they can build now? The official story is that all of this ended with the church committee. That oversight was established, that safeguards were put in place, that the dark chapters of American intelligence history were closed for good. But institutions don't really change their nature. They just get better at hiding what they do. The heart attack gun was retired not because assassination became immoral, but because better methods were developed. Quieter methods, more sophisticated methods. Methods that don't leave physical evidence for senators to wave around on television. The records from Building 470 might be gone, but the knowledge lives on. In different buildings, under different names, with better security and deeper classification levels. What else did they have in that laboratory? Probably more than we'll ever know. The heart attack gun was just what they were willing to show Congress when they had no choice. It was the least sensitive item they could display to satisfy public curiosity while keeping the real secrets buried. But secrets have a way of surfacing eventually. Files get declassified. Witnesses come forward. New technology reveals old lies. And sometimes, late at night when nobody's supposed to be listening, someone decides it's time to tell the truth about what really happened in those sterile rooms where murder was refined into an art form. The weapon they never actually destroyed is still out there. Not the dart gun, that was just a relic by the time Church held it up for the cameras. The real weapon was the knowledge itself. The understanding of how to kill without consequence, how to make assassination look like accident, how to turn the human body into its own executioner. And that weapon is still being used today. December 17, 1975. Senator Frank Church stood in front of those television cameras, held up that dart gun, and promised America that the CIA's assassination program was over. The weapons would be destroyed. The toxins would be eliminated. The scientists would be reassigned. You probably thought that was the end of the story. Here's what Church didn't know when he made that promise. 3 days before his committee even started asking questions, a technician at Fort Detrick had already moved the backup prototypes to a different building. Building 1412. Same compound, different paperwork, different inventory system. The official destruction order that came down in January 1976 specified the weapons, currently catalogued in Technical Services Division inventory. Very precise language, very carefully written. The backup units weren't in TSD inventory. They were listed under Research and Development Materials, Biological Defense Program. Nobody lied technically. They destroyed exactly what they said they'd destroy. Now this is the part where the paper trail gets interesting. In 1978, 3 years after Church promised America these weapons were gone, the Defense Department submitted a budget request for specialized delivery systems research. $47 million. The line item description was buried on page 847 of a 1,200-page appropriations document. What kind of research requires $47 million and gets hidden in the back of a defense budget? You remember Dr. Nathan Gordon, the scientist who wouldn't stop asking questions about who got shot with these things. In 1979, 4 years after the Church Committee, he tried to publish a paper about unacknowledged biological weapons testing, 1953-1975. The journal that accepted it was the American Journal of Medical Ethics. Peer-reviewed, fact-checked, ready to print. 3 days before publication, Gordon got a call, not from the CIA. Not from the Pentagon, from his department chair at Johns Hopkins. The university was losing its federal research grants, all of them effective immediately, unless certain publications were reconsidered. Gordon pulled the paper, but he kept his notes. Those notes ended up with his daughter after he died in 1987. Heart attack. He was 53 years old, jogged every morning, no history of cardiac problems. The autopsy found nothing unusual. Clean arteries, strong heart muscle, just stopped. His daughter found something interesting when she went through his files. A list of names, 14 people, next to each name a date and a location. Next to each date a single word, cardiac. She tried to research the names. 12 of the 14 had died of heart attacks between 1960 and 1975. All were either foreign officials, journalists, or scientists working on sensitive projects. All were under 60 years old. All had clean autopsies. The 2 who were still alive. One was a Cuban exile leader living in Miami. The other was a microbiologist in Belgium who'd been asking questions about American biological weapons research. Both died of heart attacks within 6 months of each other in 1988. Now here's where things get murky. In 1992, a janitor at Fort Detrick found something while cleaning out a storage room that was being converted to office space. 3 metal cases locked with biohazard symbols and dates from the 1970s. The cases weren't on any inventory. Nobody knew they were there. The janitor did what he was supposed to do. He reported it to his supervisor. His supervisor called the base security office. Security called the appropriate people. The janitor never saw those cases again, but he remembered the serial numbers. He wrote them down just in case. Smart guy. Those serial numbers, they matched the inventory codes for the dart guns that were supposedly destroyed in 1976. The janitor tried to report what he'd found to a journalist in 1994. The reporter was interested, very interested, started making calls, asking questions, digging into classified budgets from the late 70s. 2 weeks into his investigation, the reporter got transferred. Company restructuring, his editor explained. Budget cuts. New priorities. The story got killed. The janitor, he kept working at Fort Detrick until he retired in 2001. Never talked about those cases again. Smart guy, like I said, but in 2003 something interesting happened. The Belgian microbiologist's research partner, the one who'd been asking questions about American biological weapons back in the 80s, published a memoir. Most of it was standard academic stuff. Conferences attended, papers published, students mentored. But there was one chapter that stood out. He described a conversation he'd had with his colleague just days before the heart attack in 1988. His colleague had been excited about something he'd discovered in archived CIA documents that had been declassified through a Freedom of Information Act request. The documents showed that the heart attack gun program hadn't ended in 1975. It had been transferred, moved from the CIA to a Joint Defense Department and National Institutes of Health project called Cardiac Research Initiative. The Belgian scientist had copies of budget allocations, personnel transfers, even facility modifications at Fort Detrick. All dated between 1976 and 1985. All showing continuous funding for what the documents called specialized cardiac intervention research. He was going to publish his findings, had already contacted journalists in 3 countries. Then he had that heart attack. His research partner kept those documents for 15 years before including them in his memoir. By 2003, he figured enough time had passed. Most of the people involved were dead or retired. What could happen? The memoir was published in French by a small academic press in Brussels. Sold maybe 300 copies, mostly to libraries and researchers. Nobody paid much attention, except someone did pay attention. 3 months after publication, the publisher received a call from someone claiming to represent the estate of one of the American scientists mentioned in the book. Copyright infringement, they said. Unauthorized use of classified materials. Legal action would follow unless the book was withdrawn from circulation. The publisher pulled the book. The few copies that had been sold somehow disappeared from library collections. Digital copies vanished from academic databases. The memoir became one of those books that officially existed but couldn't actually be found. But the author had been careful. He'd made copies of everything and given them to colleagues in 4 different countries, just in case. One of those colleagues was an American historian who specialized in Cold War intelligence operations. She'd been researching CIA assassination programs for a book she was writing about the church committee. The Belgian documents fit perfectly with what she'd already discovered. She found more. Budget documents from the 1980s showing continued funding for cardiac intervention research. Personnel records showing technical services division staff being transferred to new projects rather than dismissed. Facility modifications at Fort Detrick that included new laboratory construction in 1982, 1987, and 1991. All of this suggested the same thing. The heart attack gun program never ended. It just got better funding and moved to a more secure location. The historian tried to publish her findings in 2007. 3 academic journals accepted her paper, then withdrew acceptance citing national security concerns. The 4th journal published it, then removed it from their website 6 weeks later following what they called editorial review. She died in 2009. Car accident on a rainy night outside Washington. Lost control on a curve she'd driven thousands of times. No mechanical problems with the vehicle, no alcohol or drugs in her system, just lost control. Her research files donated to her university library according to her will. But when her colleagues went to retrieve them, the boxes had been damaged in a flood. Water damage, the librarians explained. Everything had to be destroyed. So here we are, 15 years after that historian died. Nearly 50 years after Senator Church held up that dart gun and promised America the assassination program was over. You want to know what bothers me most about this story? It's not that they probably kept building these weapons. It's not that they probably kept using them. It's that they got so good at making the evidence disappear that we'll never know for sure. Every paper trail leads to a dead end. Every witness dies at a convenient time. Every researcher who gets close finds their funding cut, or their files destroyed, or their health failing in ways that leave no trace. That's the real weapon they perfected, not the dart gun that fired frozen shellfish toxin. The system that makes inconvenient truths vanish so completely that even asking the questions becomes dangerous. They've gotten very good at that system. 50 years of practice will do that. And here's the part that should really bother you. If they were this good at hiding a relatively simple assassination program in the 1970s, what do you think they've gotten better at hiding since then? That's the story, or at least, that's the version that survived. Somewhere in a storage room at Fort Detrick, there might still be 3 metal cases that were never supposed to exist. If you made it this far, you're the kind of person this channel was made for. We go deep on a different American mystery every night. Subscribe and I'll see you tomorrow. And hey, tell me in the comments, do you think they really destroyed all the heart attack guns in 1976, or do you think some are still out there? I want to hear your theory. Sleep well.